CE, the Vesuvius volcano erupted and burned down two beautiful cities of the Roman Empire, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Many of you have probably heard about this tragic story. However, few people know that in the middle of the 18th century, archaeologists discovered ancient scrolls from that time amongst the ruins of Herculaneum. For any scientist or historian, such a discovery is a treasure trove that offers insights into the thoughts and lives of people from over 2,000 years ago. However, the problem was that 1,800 scrolls were found in very poor condition, singed by the heat of the volcano, coated in ash and soot. They had become hardened black lumps. Brittle as coal, any careless movement could destroy them. Scientists were aware that invaluable knowledge from an ancient Roman library was concealed within, and endeavored to decipher the texts. One method was to cut the scrolls in half and scrape off the thin layers of solid dust and ashes. Then, the researchers created a special machine that could slowly unroll the scrolls. They managed to read a few words, but unfortunately, such methods damaged and even destroyed some of the artifacts. In those instances, archaeologists could only wait for advancements in technology that would allow them to unfold and read the scrolls. And finally, this day has arrived. Artificial intelligence has now enabled researchers to decipher texts written 2,000 years ago, even though the inscriptions on the scrolls were charred and nearly illegible. Initially, scientists scanned the scrolls and created high-resolution digital models. This process allowed specialists to identify the areas where ancient ink had altered the texture and shape of the papyrus fibers. In the regions where ink was applied, the papyrus was slightly thicker and contained a higher level of carbon, the key component of the ink. The researchers developed a machine learning model capable of detecting these subtle details within the papyrus. They uploaded thousands of 3D images of the scrolls to the internet, inviting people to collaborate with AI in decoding the text. During the early stages, the system occasionally made errors, making human assistance essential. To incentivize participation, scientists and investors from Silicon Valley offered $1 million to anyone who could successfully decode the texts. This initiative significantly accelerated the process, resulting in the deciphering of several passages from the ancient works. Fragments of the first transcripts are like a blog about how to enjoy life. The author of the scroll, Philodemus, was a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who considered pleasure and luxury the highest goal in his life. So, Philodemus thought so too. We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. It feels as if it was written by some modern influencer talking about a detox program or a diet. It seems that people who lived 2,000 years ago were almost the same as modern ones. Philodemus was apparently a wealthy man, because he lived in a villa that may have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. In his works, the author criticized the Stoics, who couldn't say anything about pleasure at all. Philodemus was such an ardent fan of Epicureanism that one of the scientists compared him to a guy who collected albums from only one band and nothing else. Several hundred Herculaneum scrolls remain unread. Scientists believe that they may contain works by Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, and the Stoics. Fortunately, with modern AI technologies, the decryption process will go on much faster. But how did historians and linguists decipher ancient texts in the past centuries? It was actually a very difficult mental job. Let's say you found an ancient slab in the 19th century, somewhere in Greece. To understand what was written there, you'd have to compare it to several other deciphered plates with similar writings of that era or similar languages. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, you'd be deciphering ancient writings for several months or even years to figure out, say, the recipe for ancient mashed potatoes. Fortunately, with the development of computer technology, those days are long gone. Now, all ancient scrolls can be scanned and uploaded to a database on a computer. You may not even have to decipher the text for a long time if the computer finds a match of characters in other ancient manuscripts. But even if you have a perfectly preserved piece of papyrus or an ancient book where all letters are visible, this doesn't mean that you and AI will be able to decipher it. One of the most famous encrypted texts is the Voynich manuscript. This work, which consists of 240 colorful pages, was acquired by Polish bookseller in 1912. He found that book intriguing because of astrological symbols, unknown plants, and unusual human figures drawn on its pages. And all this was accompanied by handwritten texts. The author had beautiful, clear handwriting, but the language of the book is still unknown. Someone wrote this art book around the beginning of the 15th century and divided it into 6 sections devoted to botany, astronomy, biology, cooking, medicine, and cosmology. Many scientists and linguists have tried to decipher the mysterious drawings with inscriptions, but no one has gotten reliable results. Even AI couldn't help this difficult task. Some believe that this book is dedicated to science, and others believe that it contains knowledge about witchcraft. Perhaps it's a mix of science and magic. According to one version, the manuscript is a medical textbook that copied information from other scientific works from the Middle Ages. Before the invention of the printing press, people copied books and rewrote them by hand without worrying about copyrights. It's possible that the author of the manuscript outlined all their knowledge about herbal medicines and the influence of astrology on health. People in the past believed that the state of the body and stars in the sky were connected. The coolest thing is that the book has been scanned. You can download it in high resolution and try to decrypt it yourself. Who knows? Maybe you will succeed and get some ancient secret knowledge. An unknown language or poor text condition may not always be a problem for linguists. Imagine that you open some copy of classical literature dated to the 19th century. You read the pages carefully, and at the end of the day, you feel slightly unwell. You read the book every day and feel worse and worse. At some point, you go to the hospital, and doctors tell you that you've been poisoned. Yeah, sometimes working with old books can be literally dangerous for your health. There are even catalogs of poisonous books in the world. They are toxic not because someone intentionally sprayed them with poison to hurt the reader, but because people wanted to make books look more colorful. Recently, 2 such books have been withdrawn from the National Library of France because of their bright green covers. The pages were ordinary, but the hardcover could have been coated with arsenic. The mass production of books took place in the 19th century. Book publishers wanted to release as many copies as possible, so they used not expensive leather covers for them, but cheaper fabric options. To make a book attractive to customers, they painted them in bright green, yellow, red, and other colors. They got the green color of the cover thanks to the bright pigment created from copper and arsenic. It was a very cheap dye, but brighter than other dyes containing copper carbonate. An arsenic dye was used not only for books, but also to create candles and wallpaper. The problem was that the dye's pigment decomposed quickly and released toxic carcinogenic fumes. Arsenic caused severe health problems. People calmly lived in their homes and couldn't understand what was happening to them. The same thing happened to many readers of that time. It was only by the end of the 19th century that people stopped selling toxic items. Now, to read a poisonous book, if you want to do it that is, you have to wear gloves and a protective mask. And after work, wash your hands thoroughly.
Can you tell me what date it is today? Piece of cake. You just look at your smartphone and voila, you immediately know the day, month, and year. But was it always this easy to tell the date? Did the ancient people even have the concept of a year that lasts 365 days? Yes and no. Mayan calendars had cycles. That's close to what we call a year. But the Mayan cycle was much longer, 819 days. And this is where the mystery begins. 819 days compared to what? When does this calendar begin and when does it end? Scientists were asking themselves this question for decades. They discovered and deciphered the Mayan calendar during the 1940s. Recently, 2 American scientists, John Linden and Victoria Bricker, came forward with a solution. So, What did they do differently from their predecessors? The duo deciphered the code by broadening their thinking. They expanded the calendar from 819 days to full 45 years. That's 20 times longer than the original cycle. And a pattern started to emerge. This was a major breakthrough because the Maya told time in a complicated way. You can forget about the easy-to-read Arabic numerals we have today. These ancient people used glyphs. These are tiny images that represent characters, something like the icons on your desktop or universal symbols. When you see a little dot with 3 curved lines above it, you know there is a Wi-Fi network available. The Mayan calendar used glyphs that represented animals or natural phenomena. For example, there were symbols for a jaguar and an eagle. Each glyph marked one day. Each cycle is repeated 4 times, 8 and 19 x 4. Let's call these 4 cycles blocks. The Mayas colored each block differently. Scientists thought these colors corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions. Red was east, white, north. West was black, and finally, yellow marked south. But then the 1980s came. Yeah, this was a weird decade. The calculations were all wrong. Researchers determined that the colors were associated with the position of the sun in the sky. It turned out that the color yellow represented the highest point of the sun, which is called a zenith. White was the lowest point, called the nadir. It seems that the calendar showed just how good the ancient Mayas were at astronomy. This is most evident at Chichen Itza. This principal Mayan city is located on the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. There stands an impressive step pyramid. It is dedicated to the feathered serpent deity, and its alignment is perfect. Something marvelous happens here twice a year, during the equinoxes, March and September. These are the times when the sun shines directly over the equator. On these 2 dates, the day and night last the same. At the site of the pyramid, sunlight first illuminates the sculpture of the serpent head at the base of the structure. Then it makes its way up the 91 steps. This creates the illusion that a snake is slithering down the pyramid. Even today, people gather to witness the sight. And it must have been more impressive when the Mayas completed the structure 1050-1300 CE. Do you know what a synodic period is? Neither do I. But Mayan astronomers did. A synodic period is the time that passes before a stellar body does a full lap. For example, this is the period between 2 full moons. When you look from Earth, this period lasts roughly 30 days. And the Mayas were looking at the skies non-stop. They carefully noted the synodic periods of all planets. From Venus to Saturn, these ancient astronomers kept records of nearly all celestial bodies. But what does this have to do with their calendar? The American researchers' calculations revealed the link. Let's take the planet closest to the Sun as an example, Mercury. Its synodic period is 117 days. Multiply that by 7 and you get which number? Exactly 8 to 19, when 17 x 7 equals sign 819? Coincidence? Definitely not. Because synodic periods of other planets also neatly match the magical figure 819. But this is not visible from a single Mayan cycle. Scientists had to expand it several times to discover the pattern. There is a reason why no one could decipher the code for so long. They were focused on a single planet. The trick was to add the Mayan calculation for all the planets. Researchers just needed to see the bigger picture. This brings us to the year 2012. Can you remember that some people thought that the world would end on December 21st? That turned out to be a bust. We are alive and well now. But what started this false rumor? The Mayan calendar, of course. You see, these ancient people based their calendar on long periods of all the planets. That included a lot of complicated math and a lot of multiplying. This 2012 was simply the time when their cycle ended. It is known as the long count. This period is the same as our year. For the Mayas, 2012 was something like the 31st of December for us. Just an end of a cycle in which they measured time, so there was no need to panic. Those New Year's Eve parties might be a bit wild, but the world doesn't end on January 1st. The Mayas stretched more than their calendar. Rubber was the name of the game. Yes, you've heard it correctly. These ancient people were making different grades of rubber 3,000 years before one famous American did, Charles Goodyear. They would extract natural latex from the rubber tree. This is a milky substance that can be turned into rubber. And they weren't the only ones. Scientists found evidence that their neighbors, the Aztecs and the Olmecs, did the same. But what did they do with rubber? They didn't need car tires, definitely. But it's cool to have a nice pair of sandals for the beach. The Spanish wrote about rubber sole footwear that natives wore. Sadly, scientists still haven't found them. That would be a big step for archaeology. So the Maya were playful with rubber, literally. Researchers guessed that they produced balls from latex. These were bouncy and ranged in size from a softball to a soccer ball. A typical Mayan ball game, pits, involved 2 hoops. You must be thinking basketball, but not quite. The hoops were set on walls, 23 feet high. Compare that to the NBA standard of 10 feet. And the hoop was the other way around. There is also a sweet side to the story of the Mayas. These ancient people enjoyed chocolate. In fact, the modern word chocolate probably comes from their language, xocolotl. This meant bitter water. Okay, you get the bitter part, but why water? The Mayas didn't produce chocolate in the form we know it today. They didn't make bars of chocolate, they drank it. Smashed cocoa beans made for excellent drinks. The Mayas perfected the mixture over time and even added spices. Anyone up for a fiery chocolate drink with stew peppers and cornmeal? Who knows, maybe this beverage actually tasted well. Cocoa beans were sacred and used as a currency. Researchers believe all social classes got to enjoy it. Free chocolate for all sounds nice even today. But where did the Mayas get clean water for their cocoa drinks? From the oldest known filtration system in the Western Hemisphere. It was based on zeolite. These are minerals that contain aluminum and silicone compounds. And guess what? Modern air and water purifiers still use this material. Mayan tech wins yet again. Back in Europe, Roger Bacon developed a sand filtration system in 1627, some 1,800 years after the Mayas. But what about regions without rivers, lakes, or springs? Mayan engineers had it all figured out. Rainwater. They would carve out large reservoirs in the limestone bedrock. Then, they would coat these underground caves with a layer of a watertight material. The final step was to make small channels that collected water from the hills above. Scientists estimated that just one of these reservoirs could hold on average 10,000 gallons of rainwater, enough to fill 55 modern hot tubs.
2 centuries ago, a 31-year-old Frenchman stormed into his brother's office in Paris. He had only one thing to share. "I've got it!" The man was so excited that he immediately collapsed. He spent the next 5 days in bed recovering his health. Who was this mysterious person, and why was he so thrilled? Jean-François Champollion made one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history. He had cracked the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This enabled scientists to finally unravel the secrets of this ancient civilization. They weren't able to read hieroglyphs for nearly 2,000 years. After the Romans took over Egypt, the intricate writing system slowly faded away from people's minds. The last of the hieroglyphic texts date back to the 4th century. For thousands of years, Egyptians used images to show their lives. But the knowledge of how to read these pictures was lost to modern science. The story of hieroglyphs began in 3250 before current era. That's when ancient Egyptians developed writing. Their motivation was to better organize the distribution and storage of goods. One of the earliest examples is a ceramic jar that had an inscription in black ink. There were 2 major writing systems. The first were the hieroglyphs, which literally means sacred carving. Egyptians carved hieroglyphs in stone on temples, tombs, and similar monuments for 3,000 years. They present a system of pictorial texts. A pictograph is a picture or a drawing that stands for an idea of a word. It's a precursor to the true writing as we have it today. For example, when Egyptians wanted to write ibis, they would draw a small image of the bird. Hieroglyphs can be found on walls. They were a formal way of writing. The other writing system was hieratic. Egyptians mostly used it when writing on papyrus. That's an early, thicker form of the paper we have today. It soon evolved into demotic. This improved version became the most common writing systems in ancient Egypt. Then, in the early 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great took control of Egypt. This was the time when the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty ruled the country. You've probably heard of the last ruler of this dynasty, Cleopatra. During her time, Egyptian Demotic and Greek were used side by side. The two started mixing, and by the year 100, a new language emerged, Coptic. It slowly replaced the ancient writing system. Only Egyptian priests used hieroglyphs for the next couple of centuries, and then their meaning was lost to history. But not forever. Arabs were the first who tried to solve the mystery of the hieroglyphs. Medieval travelers came across these strange symbols and wanted to understand their meaning. They consulted speakers of Coptic and translated text from Greek and Latin into Arabic to break the code of the hieroglyphs. During the Renaissance, Europeans also became fascinated with the legacy of ancient Egypt. Scholars from the Old Continent believed that hieroglyphs were a group of symbols as opposed to a written language. This was all about to change in 1799. A year earlier, Napoleon, the famous French ruler, arrived in Egypt. His subordinates constructed a fort that dated back to the 15th century. Rashid, or Rosetta, was a port town in the northeast of Egypt, near Alexandria. One section of the old fortification wall contained an interesting slab inside. The stone tablet was made of a granite-like rock. It was just 40 inches high and 30 inches wide. It contained 3 distinctive sections of text carved into it. The letters were in 3 scripts and 2 languages: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. It was a fragment of a larger ancient stela. These are upright stone slabs that are used to dedicate to a person or an event, but the one from Rosetta was damaged. 2/3 of the hieroglyphic text on the top was missing. The bottom Greek text lacked a cornerstone. The only fully preserved section was the writing in Demotic in the middle of the slab. It eventually ended up in the British Museum. The scientific community was intrigued, and the race was on to decipher it. Prints and casts of the slab went out all over Europe. Scholars already knew ancient Greek, so in theory, this shouldn't have been so hard. The first people who saw the Rosetta Stone thought the process would take 2 weeks. In the end, it took 2 decades. The main issue was the fact that hieroglyphs and spoken ancient Egyptian didn't have a connection anymore. Scientists didn't know what sounds the letters on the slab corresponded to. Imagine if English disappeared 1,000 years in the future. Then someone finds a tablet with the word dog. At first, they wouldn't know how to read the word or the individual letters. Even if they figured out how to pronounce the word, they wouldn't know its meaning. This is what linguists were dealing with in the case of the Rosetta Stone. The careful study of the artifact produced another find. The texts weren't direct translations of each other. They both described the same event, but in different words. It was like you saw a movie with 2 friends, and then all 3 of you wrote different reviews about it. The original text was probably in Greek, but the translators added extra words to make it sound more Egyptian. An English physician and physicist, Thomas Young, made the first great breakthrough. He knew that the name Ptolemy appeared several times in the text based on the Greek translation. This wasn't an Egyptian name, so it was impossible to represent it with a single image. The only way to spell out this Greek name was to use symbols that sound like it when produced. This is called transliteration, and we have it today as well. This is how foreign-sounding words are written down in Chinese or some Slavic languages. Young focused on sets of hieroglyphs in oval frames. These are called cartouches. He experimented a bit but finally discovered that one of them read, Ptolemy the Great. The individual hieroglyphs that made up this name corresponded to sounds needed to produce it. This is where our mysterious man from the beginning of the video enters the picture. Champollion picked up where Young left off. He knew Coptic, so the Frenchman was able to determine what many other hieroglyphs sounded like. The eureka moment was close. It came while he was studying a cartouche from a site dedicated to Ramses II. It had 4 symbols. The last 2 were the same. He determined this was the sound S. The first symbol was the sun. This is Ra or Re in Coptic. So the cartouche read Ra something SS. Can you already guess the name? Of course, it's Ramses. This breakthrough finally cracked the code. Ancient Egyptian wasn't a mishmash of cool-looking images. It was a phonetic language that Jean-François Champollion discovered in September of 1822. The stone slab is today known as the Decree of Memphis. The Egyptian council issued it in this city in the year 196 before current era. In it, they expressed their loyalty to the pharaoh. They erected identical stelae and temples all across Egypt. The Rosetta Stone was just one copy of them, but its content is less important than the fact that Champollion's translation gave these ancient peoples their voice again. During the 1800s, European scholars didn't think that the Egyptian civilization was much older than classical Greek or Roman. Now that scientists could read hieroglyphs, a whole new chapter of human history opened. One of the most famous finds in the history of archaeology happened in 1922. That's when the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The whole world admired King Tut's golden mask. But without Champollion's pioneering work, it would be impossible to know who its owner was. The young pharaoh's cartouche is phonetic. For instance, you pronounce the pictograph of a chick as the vowel U. The symbol for the key of life is an ankh, and there is a shepherd's crook in the end. It symbolizes the word ruler. Back in December 2012, a lot of people were freaking out over the idea that the world might end in some catastrophic event. And it was all thanks to the famous Maya calendar. This ancient way of tracking time had been the subject of endless speculation. But one of its biggest mysteries was definitely an 819-day count found in some versions of the calendar. No one could explain why it was there or how it worked, until recently, when a group of researchers from Cambridge might have finally cracked the code. First things first, how does the Maya calendar work? So the system the Maya civilization used to track days was based on something we now call the calendar round. Think of it like 3 interlocking gears. These are 3 cycles working together. The first is a 365-day solar year, known as Hab. The second is a cycle of 20 names. And the third is a cycle of 13 numbers, which forms a 260-day sacred calendar, called Solkine. Just like we'd say something like December 25th, 2025, they named their days based on how these 3 cycles lined up. For example, here we have the day 3 Manik and the 14th of the month Hop. It takes 52 years for the 3 cycles to align in the same way again. After that, the days start repeating. But this is where things start to get more complicated and mysterious. On some Mayan monuments, we have also found enigmatic inscriptions pointing to the existence of another cycle, the 819-day count. There are about 20 examples of these inscriptions, mostly found in places like Palenque and Yaxchilan in Mexico. So it didn't seem random at all, and this calendar must have been hiding a big secret. Early research showed that the 819-day cycle was represented by one of 4 colors and the cardinal directions associated with them. Black was tied to the west, red to the east, white to the north, and yellow to the south. Researchers also discovered that this period of time could be broken down into 3 smaller cycles. One of 9 days, one of 7 days, and one of 13 days. Multiply them together, and you'd get 819 days. Pretty cool, but why did they do that? This color scheme and the 3 cycles seemed like a basic level of interpretation, and experts were pretty sure its real purpose was still hidden from us. Another thing researchers noticed is that this strange count of days was mostly shown using a Y glyph, followed by a number. But in some cases, they also added a glyph representing Kawil. This was a powerful Maya deity, often associated with creation and lightning. He was usually symbolized by a torch coming out of his forehead, representing the spark of life. But in the 90s, a study suggested that when Kawil's inscription showed smoke and fire coming from his forehead, it could actually represent the planets Jupiter or Saturn, or maybe even both. Wait, that means that the 819 days count could be linked to both planets in some way. From there, research focused on figuring out what that link might be. The first conclusion is that this calendar might have helped the Maya track the movements of those planets in some way. Then they started noticing something interesting. These cycles could be specifically tied to the synodic periods of Jupiter and Saturn. By synodic periods, we mean the time it takes for a celestial body, like a planet, to return to the same or nearly the same position as seen from Earth. While this possibility was pretty exciting, something didn't quite add up. Each planet moves very differently, and trying to fit multiple planets into an 819-day span just didn't seem to work. In other words, this 4-part color-coded calendar system was simply too short to align perfectly with the synodic periods of the visible planets. So it looks like we're back to square one. This mystery had people scratching their heads for ages, until 2023, when specialists realized they might have been looking at it all wrong. Researchers actually needed to shift their perspective. Instead of seeing this system as 819 days, they needed to consider the number as representing timelines. And this period of time could be just a small part of a much, much bigger calendar. You see, as we said earlier, this cycle seemed to track the period when a planet became visible to people on Earth. To prove that these 819 cycles were timelines, not actual days, researchers needed a planet that could serve as a starting point to back up their theory. In this case, it was Mercury. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. Mercury's synodic period is 117 days, which fits perfectly into the calendar count. I mean, if you take 1819 and divide by 117, you get the number 7. So, Mercury is the only visible planet whose synodic cycle fits neatly into this period as whole numbers. Perfect. Now they had a solid starting point. From there, they needed to expand the calendar by increasing its length to 20 periods of 819 days. Suddenly, a pattern emerges. And just like that, all the synodic cycles of the planets fit perfectly into the system. For example, Saturn's synodic period from 378 days lines up perfectly after 6 819-day cycles. Venus aligns every 5 cycles. Jupiter every 19 cycles. And Mars, which takes the longest, needs 20 cycles. In other words, it takes about 45 years for Mars to align with the synodic periods of all visible planets. So, this is how researchers determined that the ancient civilization wasn't referring to days, but rather to timelines. The Maya astronomers came up with this count as part of a larger calendar system of 20 periods. But then a question comes up. Why was studying the synodic period so important to the Maya? Well, we don't have super specific answers about this mysterious calendar yet. But what we can say for sure is that the Maya truly believed in the powerful influence of the cosmos on daily life. So maybe they wanted to analyze how the movements of all the visible planets lined up with their other calendars. Of course, this system is just one part of the Maya's amazing and advanced understanding of astrology. And it wasn't just about using astrological cycles for planting and harvesting. They also had crazy specific knowledge, like how to predict solar eclipses. Archaeologists believe the Maya connection to the stars is reflected in the ruins of their world. Take the famous pyramid in the ancient city of Chichen Itza, located in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. If you look closely at the base of its staircase, you will see a snake's head carved in stone. But here's the coolest part. During the spring and fall equinoxes, when day and night are exactly the same length, the sun casts sharp, triangular shadows on the staircase. It creates the illusion of a snake slithering down the steps. Another example of how they use their knowledge of astronomy in their temples is in Tikal, Guatemala. Built around year 1 of the Common Era, this pyramid is considered one of the Mayas' earliest astronomical complexes. And its alignment and orientation allowed them to track and calculate solstices and equinoxes with incredible precision. The Maya were skilled skywatchers. Just like we have modern-day high-tech observatories with round domes, they had something similar. Meet El Caracol. The name means snail in Spanish and refers to the spiral staircase inside the tower. Built around 906 Common Era, it was the perfect place to observe all the changes in the sky and track the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Unlike us today, with our telescopes, satellites, and advanced tools, the Maya relied entirely on naked eye observation, and that makes their achievements even more incredible.
If you come across a well in Portugal, resist the temptation to gaze into its depths. The inverted tower in the enigmatic city of Sintra sends chills through those who encounter it as it spirals down a daunting 88 feet into the underground. It certainly wasn't designed to collect water, yet its true purpose remains a closely guarded secret. Dating back to around 1904, this well could have been involved in a mysterious initiation tradition from the Knights Templar. The Templars had faded into history almost 6 centuries before the construction of this pit, but their enigmatic traditions were revived by later generations. So one theory says that candidates seeking to join the group back then had to confront their deepest fears by facing this well, descending its spiral staircase blindfolded. When they reached the bottom of the inverted tower, they removed their blindfolds and were faced with this frightening sight. The only way out of this dark labyrinth was to keep looking up and following the light. Now imagine yourself browsing the shelves of a used bookstore until you find a book with an alphabet you've never seen before. You decide to use an image translation app but find no matches. Intrigued, you buy the book. Then you show it to your friends and family, but nobody recognizes that alphabet. Rare book dealer Winfried Vonnig probably experienced the same frustration back in 1912, when he acquired what would later become the most enigmatic book in the world. The work is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and it's written entirely in an unknown language that no one has deciphered yet. The pages of this 15th century codex are filled with botanical drawings, but these aren't typical daisies or roses. In fact, they don't resemble any plant species that we know of. What makes things even stranger is the illustrations of unfamiliar constellations and women swimming in green baths. Delving deeper into the realm of mysterious texts, we set off on a journey to the Qumran Caves near the Salt Sea in the Middle East. In 1952, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon 2 scrolls made of highly oxidized copper at the site. Unrolling them was a major challenge, so they decided to cut the scrolls into 23 parts to investigate them. Imagine their surprise to see Hebrew words like gold and silver popping up. But no, it wasn't an ancient invoice. It was more like a treasure map, pointing the way to over $1 million. Unfortunately, the treasure was never found. Not for lack of trying, though. You see, the quest isn't as easy as it may appear. Some of the Copper Scroll's vocabulary is technical, and some geographical locations remain a mystery. There's also one last possibility. Perhaps it's all a work of fiction, like a pirate tale from the old days. People talk about Mona Lisa's almost haunting stare that seems to follow you no matter where you stand. But here's a quick question. Does she have eyebrows? You got it right if you said no, and her complete lack of eyebrows adds another layer of mystique to her gaze. The most common explanation is that beauty standards were different, and perhaps plucking the hairs above the eyes was a thing around 1503. But take a look at other Italian paintings from that time, like La Schiavona or Portrait of a Young Girl. Yep, eyebrows. So, not everyone was entirely pleased with this theory, like French inventor Pascal Cotte. He spent 3,000 hours analyzing scans of the painting to dig through all the layers of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. Now, he claims that the Mona Lisa once had eyebrows, but they disappeared over time due to cleanings and restorations. Some historians, however, still question his findings, which means that Mona Lisa's style, or lack of it, remains an unsolved mystery. So, you decide to travel to Rio de Janeiro, and everyone tells you that Sugarloaf Mountain is a must-see. When you spot the mountain from a distance, you realize that the stone has a cavity. But around noon, the whole view changes. The shadow in that cavity takes the shape of a bird, an ibis to be precise. A local legend links this bird shape to the ancient Egyptian deity Thoth, as if the ancient Egyptians once visited Rio de Janeiro and were somehow inspired by the natural phenomenon. But it's probably just a big coincidence. I mean, literally. The real mystery, however, lies in the waters around Sugarloaf Mountain. In the 80s, archaeologist Robert Marks got a tip from locals about a treasure hidden beneath Guanabara Bay. He dove in and found quite a few Roman amphorae. You know, those ancient vases with two handles? His discovery could potentially provide evidence of a Roman shipwreck that might have reached Brazil 17 centuries before the Portuguese even set foot there. However, he couldn't proceed with his research, and to this day, the idea of the Roman presence on Brazil's coast remains uncertain. The true location of Cleopatra's tomb isn't the only ancient Egyptian mystery. Many secrets are carved into the walls of ancient structures, like in the Temple of Seti I. Take a close look at this hieroglyph, and you'll notice that it resembles a modern-day helicopter. Look to the right, and you'll see an engraving that looks like a submarine. Odd, right? The most reasonable explanation for this has to do with the legacies of different rulers. When a new pharaoh came to power, they had their own hieroglyphs added over the original ones. But this is still a topic of debate, as some Egyptologists believe that these mysterious hieroglyphs may represent some kind of ancient technology. The same applies to the Dendera light. The image found in the underground passageway of the Hathor Temple is a subject of significant controversy in Egyptian history. Some researchers suggest that the inscription simply represents a rising sun, while others interpret it as evidence of some kind of modern lighting system. And it does indeed resemble Crookes' tube, one of the early experiments with electrical discharges. Although there's no concrete evidence of ancient Egyptians having modern electricity, some historians believe that this theory could help explain why many discovered tombs don't have any residues left behind from the use of oil lamps or candles. A lot has been said about the mysterious pyramids of Egypt, but many people tend to forget that other inexplicable structures had already existed even before them. Our next stop takes us to Turkey. The top of a hill known as Göbekli Tepe, near the city of Urfa, holds an ancient secret. It features more than 20 circular stone enclosures dated back over 11,000 years. Many of these have heavily carved stone T-shaped pillars adorned with eerie human figures with folded hands. The most accepted theory is that it's the world's first temple, likely used for rituals or social events. But the greatest mystery lies in how it was built, as this site existed before the domestication of animals or the use of metal tools. So the construction must have been very difficult, challenging our understanding of the historical timeline. Now, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because we're about to take a flight over the Nazca Lines. You've probably already heard about these massive, mysterious drawings etched into an arid region of Peru. They come in many different shapes, like a spider, a monkey, and even a Google-eyed ET that is probably just a fisher. Anyway, this story got some fresh chapters in 2022 when an additional 168 new drawings were discovered. The original ones could only be seen from the air, but these new ones are much smaller and can be observed from the ground. However, one thing they have in common is that their purpose remains totally unclear. Some might call them the largest-scale calendar in the world. Others suggest that they served as a tool for agricultural purposes. Of course, many theories have emerged in an attempt to give the Nazca Lines a meaning, but the truth is that they remain some of the most important unsolved mysteries in history.
If you ever fly over the deserts of southern Peru, you'll notice distinct white lines against the rusty red background. Look closer, and you'll see some clear shapes. Straight lines, rectangles, triangles, swirls. It seems like they're parts of huge drawings. You notice a monkey, a whale, a condor, a hummingbird, and whatnot. The lines were created more than 2,000 years ago by the people of the Nazca culture. Thanks to a dry climate and strong winds in the desert, most of the Nazca lines are visible today. To create them, the Nazca people removed the top layer of pebbles and revealed the soil beneath the ground. The color of the soil changes from reddish-brown to yellowish-gray, so the lines always look different. It looks like the creators of the lines started with small-scale models and increased the proportions to create full-scale designs. Scientists have tried to decipher the meaning of the Nazca lines ever since they were first discovered in the 1920s. But the first mention of the lines was actually much earlier, in the 16th century Chronicle of Peru, where they were described as trail markers in the desert. Since you can't really study the lines and their symbolism from the ground, the lines became world famous only in the 1930s with the advent of commercial planes. A decade later, American professor Paul Kosak was doing his research on the lines and noticed one interesting thing. When he looked up from the line, it was pointing directly at the setting sun. It happened one day after the winter solstice, and the scientists concluded that the lines must be the largest astronomy book in the world. German scientist Maria Reiche, who got the nickname the Lady of the Lines, supported the theory that the geoglyphs served as a calendar and had some sort of astronomical purposes. She dedicated 40 years of her life to studying the lines and swept them inch by inch. She also moved into a small house close to the lines to protect them from unwanted visitors. Then in the 1970s, American researchers called the astronomy-related theory into question. They noted that in a region like Nazca, one of the driest places on Earth with only around 20 minutes of rain per year, water is a real treasure, and the straight lines and trapezoids must have had something to do with it. They could be pointing at locations for rituals that the local people organized to obtain water and make crops more fertile. The images of animals in the Andes region are also related to water. Spiders are thought to be a sign of rain. Hummingbirds stand for fertility, and monkeys living in the Amazon symbolize an abundance of water. In more recent years, the Nazca lines have become the research ground for archaeologists from Yamagata University. They're using high-resolution aerial photography and drones to discover and catalog geoglyphs. The team has identified a total of 358 geoglyphs so far, and 168 out of them in 2022 alone. They found images of humans, camelids, birds, orca whales, cats, and snakes, most likely created between 100 BCE and 300 CE. Some of the images are around 10 to 20 feet long, so it's no wonder no one was able to detect them before. The largest geoglyphs, by comparison, are 1,200 feet across, which is about the height of the Empire State Building. The researchers believe the Nazca lines were used as a form of communication in the desert. The linear ones pointed the direction from valley to valley. The ones drawn on slopes seem to have been drawn along ancient pathways between settlements. The scientists now plan to find patterns in the geoglyphs depending on their distribution. They use artificial intelligence to analyze the images. The AI generates designs that are likely to be painted in the desert, and the team then checks if they're actually among the Nazca lines. Another famous Peruvian geoglyph is a candelabra, slightly taller than the Washington Monument. You can find it on a seaside hill in the Paracas Peninsula. Researchers managed to establish the approximate age of the candelabra by analyzing the nearby artifacts. It looks like it dates back to around 200 BCE. The drawing is etched deep into the sand, and it was never meant to look like a candelabra. One theory says that the drawing was supposed to resemble the trident of an Incan deity to please it. Another popular theory is that sailors used it as a beacon for navigation. Effigy Mounds National Monument on the Mississippi River has 195 known Native American mounds. Most of them are conical in shape, and there are also several that look like birds, deer, turtles, bears, and panthers. Scientists have established that the mounds date back to around 450 BCE, and the images are somewhat younger. A study of the mounds found some copper, bone, and stone tools. The builders' descendants say that the mounds served as ceremonial sites. This story is passed down from generation to generation. Some historians believe the mounds could have been also used to mark celestial events or territories. The American Southwest and the nearby regions of Mexico have over 300 intaglios, which are giant images engraved in the ground. The most famous of them are the Blythe intaglios in California, west of the Colorado River. Blythe giants are a group of 6 figures, including that of a human being and an animal. Scientists believe the images are somewhere between 450 and 2,000 years old. According to the local Mojave tribe, there is an image of Mustamho, the creator of life. The animal figure shows a mountain lion who served as his helper. The largest figure is almost as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The creators of the intaglios had to scrape the dark rock of the desert until the lighter soil showed up. It's nearly impossible to notice them from ground level. That's why they were only discovered in the 1930s, when a pilot flying over them accidentally looked down. The best way to see the giants is still from a helicopter. Kazakhstan can boast its own Nazca lines, a cluster of around 260 earthworks in the north of the country. The steppe geoglyphs are a variety of geometric shapes, including squares, crosses, circles, and a 3-pronged design. The creators of the images used materials such as dirt, rocks, and lumber to build them out of the ground. A local economist first spotted the geoglyphs while browsing Google Earth in 2007. Archaeologists suppose that the structures go back 8,000 years, but they still don't know who built them or why. One theory says that the lines helped track the sun's movement. NASA got interested in the discovery since the lines are much older than the ones in Peru. They took photos of the steppe geoglyphs from space, trying to solve their mystery. Another fact that makes the lines so special is how huge they are. One of the largest of them has sides as long as an aircraft carrier. The only humans who could have built them must have been the nomadic Stone Age tribes, but it's unlikely that they had such advanced tools. If they did, that would mean that archaeologists need to rethink the abilities of our long-ago ancestors. Organizing such a huge amount of people to work together on a complicated project is an amazing feat. Although the white horse on a lush green hill in Oxfordshire, England, could easily pass for modern art, it's actually one of the most ancient geoglyphs. It was created between the Bronze and Iron Ages and is the oldest chalk-cut hill figure in Britain. Whoever created it had to remove the turf to reveal the chalky white part of the soil. Scientists can only guess why this piece of art was created. It could have been a fertility symbol or a way to mark territory. Aerial images prove that the horse has changed over time because of the soil. It took several centuries to reveal a larger horse-like shape that lies under what we see now.
No man shall ever find my tomb. That's what, according to rumors, Cleopatra once said. Rumor has it really wasn't about the gender. She wanted no living soul to disturb her, and I think she meant that no human would ever discover the location of her grave. But, surprisingly, it was indeed a woman who was closer than anyone before to finally discovering the Queen's resting place. Meet Kathleen Martinez Berry, a criminal lawyer turned archaeologist. She got so intrigued with Cleopatra's story that she packed her bags and went to Egypt with no official support and even no permission from the authorities. All she had was pure determination to find the Queen's tomb. Now, you could say Kathleen had always been ahead of the game. She skipped grades in school, mastered piano, chess, swimming, and martial arts, and grew up listening to top intellectuals debating in her home. And she even got her law degree at just 19, and archaeology was her side passion. She had never actually been to Egypt, never dug up a single artifact. But her fascination with Cleopatra went all the way back to an argument with her father in 1990. That day, she walked into his library looking for a copy of Antony and Cleopatra by Shakespeare. Her dad, Fausto Martinez, a professor and legal expert, casually called Cleopatra a seductress. Kathleen wasn't having it. She fired back, arguing that history had been totally unfair to Cleopatra. The Romans, she said, wanted to destroy her reputation, and for centuries, people had just believed their version of the story. The debate went on for hours, and in the end, her father admitted maybe he had judged Cleopatra too harshly. That conversation changed everything for Kathleen. From that day on, she read every ancient text she could find, especially Plutarch's account of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Cleopatra wasn't just some queen who fell for the wrong guy. She was a genius, playing a dangerous political game to keep Egypt independent. And the more she read, the more she started thinking, what if everyone had been looking for Cleopatra's tomb in the wrong place? That thought stuck with her. When she was caring for her second child, she earned a master's in archaeology. Multitasking. That reignited an obsession that would take over her life, uncovering the truth about Cleopatra. Even though most experts believe that Cleopatra's tomb, along with the final resting place of 13 other Ptolemaic rulers, lies somewhere beneath modern-day Alexandria, Dr. Martinez has a different idea. She believes Cleopatra was buried at Taposiris Magna, an ancient temple dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian deity of the afterlife. But she still needed an ancient foundation plate. These plates, about the size of a smartphone, were placed beneath important temple structures and often contained inscriptions explaining when and why the temple was built. If she could find a plate that confirmed the temple was dedicated to Isis, Cleopatra's patron deity, she'd have solid proof that this was the right place to look. Nothing could deter Martinez. She excavated the entire temple site, digging deeper than anyone before her. Her team found coins with Cleopatra's name and face stamped on them. It meant Cleopatra had a direct connection to this site. Then, they uncovered something even more interesting. A tunnel used to bring water to people, leading straight from the temple into the Mediterranean Sea. So, if parts of the temple had already sunken into the water, could Cleopatra's tomb be down there too? Martinez needed proof to convince Egyptian authorities to let her search underwater. And, against all odds, she found the missing foundation plate. On it, the pharaoh offered a large area of Nubia to deity Isis. That was it, the confirmation she needed. The temple was indeed dedicated to Isis, proving her theory wasn't just speculation. If one temple was on land, Martinez suspected the second temple, possibly Cleopatra's tomb, had collapsed into the sea. She needed help from experts in underwater archaeology, so she reached out to Robert Ballard, the guy who discovered the Titanic. With support from the Egyptian authorities, she and her team began exploring the waters off the coast of Alexandria. And what they found was mind-blowing. Underwater, they discovered massive stone structures, some standing 6 to 10 feet tall, right where the coastline would have been thousands of years ago. They also found basalt blocks, the same material used in the statues from the first temple. That meant one thing: those weren't just random rocks. They were the remains of a lost city, buried beneath the sea for centuries. Now, we can only wait and see whether Martinez and her team will be able to unravel one of the greatest mysteries of the past left by the outstanding woman that was Cleopatra. Here's some backstory. After her father, Ptolemy VII, passed away, Egypt's throne went to both Ptolemy VIII and Cleopatra, or so it seemed. Cleopatra, just 18 at the time, allegedly married her 10-year-old brother. Yeah, ancient royalty had some different customs, though there's no solid proof of that. But sibling love didn't last long. Young Ptolemy decided he wanted all the power for himself and tried to push Cleopatra out. Forced to flee the country, she didn't just sit around feeling sorry for herself. She raised an army, ready to march back and take what was hers. That's how, at 21, she was already in the Sinai Desert, leading an army and planning her return to the throne. Now, by that time, Cleopatra had already been locked in a powerful political, and not only political, alliance with Julius Caesar. In June 47 BC, she gave birth to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, better known as Caesarion, who, many believe, was Caesar's child. But that didn't stop her from playing by Egyptian royal rules. And her husband number 2, her other brother, Ptolemy XIV. Yep, despite her ongoing affair with Caesar, Cleopatra married yet another sibling, because, in her world, keeping the throne in the family was the name of the game. Now, marriage aside, Cleopatra's bond with Caesar stayed strong. She even traveled to Rome with Ptolemy XIV for a state visit. But instead of playing the role of a dutiful queen, she stayed in Caesar's private villa by the Tiber River. But after Julius Caesar lost his life in 44 BCE on the Ides of March, Cleopatra's political standing became shaky. To make matters worse, her brother-husband Ptolemy XIV passed away soon after, and some suspect Cleopatra had a hand in it, leaving her as the sole ruler of Egypt. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Mark Antony was rising to power as Caesar's presumed successor. Wanting to size up the Queen of Egypt, he summoned Cleopatra, and she did not disappoint. Sailing into town on the lavish barge, dressed as a deity, Cleopatra made quite an entrance. Antony was instantly mesmerized, so much so that he left his third wife back in Rome and followed Cleopatra to Alexandria, where their relationship turned into a full-blown royal affair. The two had 3 children together. Together, they waged war against Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, in a battle for control of the Roman Empire. The last time the queen was seen, she was in her mausoleum, dressed in full royal splendor, diadem on her head, lying on what Plutarch called a golden couch. When Antony and Cleopatra lost at Actium, Octavian's forces marched into Alexandria. Cleopatra apparently knew the end was near, so she locked herself inside her mausoleum, surrounded by gold, silver, pearls, and priceless art. Those were the treasures she threatened to burn rather than let the Romans take them. Antony, meanwhile, wasn't going to let the Romans capture him alive. He wounded himself with his own sword, but before he passed away, he was carried to Cleopatra's side. She held him as he took his last breath in her arms. A little over a week later, Cleopatra made her own choice. Rather than face humiliation as Octavia's prisoner, she ended her life. Legend says it was the bite of a deadly asp, though history isn't quite clear on that. At the time, Cleopatra was only 39. Sounds like a rather full life to me.
We all grew up believing that Stonehenge is the world's most ancient observatory, but now it has some serious competition for the title. Nabta Playa was built more than 2,000 miles away in southern Egypt, and thousands of years before Stonehenge and even the pyramids of Giza. In 1973, a Bedouin guide stumbled upon a strange group of huge stone formations while crossing the Sahara Desert. He led American archaeologist Fred Wendorf to the site, located about 60 miles from the Nile. Wendorf's friend and colleague claims the team found the stones while stopping for a bathroom break in the desert. Either way, what they found changed history. At first, Wendorf thought the stone structures were just natural formations. But then it hit him. This area was once a lake, meaning no natural rocks should even be there. He kept coming back to the site for decades, and by the early 1990s, his team finally uncovered a circle of stones that seemed to line up with the stars in a way no one could explain. After 7 long years of trying to crack the mystery of the site, Wendorf reached out to an expert in archaeoastronomy. They study how ancient people used the stars. One evening, while the expert sat in the cool desert sand staring at the stones, he realized that they formed a pattern radiating outward from a massive burial mound. One by one, as they dug into the sediment, the buried megaliths started lining up like spokes on a wheel. The team had already used radiocarbon dating to test samples from fire hearths and tamarisk wood roofing found inside the stone circle. Nabta Playa had dozens of standing stones, all a few feet tall. Some of them lined up exactly with the sunrise on special days, and others matched up with bright stars in the sky. Inside the big circle, there were 6 special stones that may have been used for rituals or marking important times of the year. Around them, 29 standing stones might have worked like a simple calendar to help people know when it was time for something important, like the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. When the sun rose in just the right spot, it was a sign that the rainy season was coming. The stone circle once aligned with the brightest stars in the northern sky: Arcturus, Sirius, and Alpha Centauri. Some stones even pointed to the constellation Orion. By tracing Arcturus's movement across the sky, they figured out that it matched perfectly with the circle around 4800 BCE. That means it was the oldest astronomical site ever discovered. And the people of Nabta Playa may have been watching the stars thousands of years before telescopes were even invented. It looks like it had a huge meaning for people living and traveling through the desert. Over 10,000 years ago, the long, cold, and dry ice age that lasted for tens of thousands of years was finally fading away. Northern Africa got massive monsoons and rains that filled up seasonal lakes. So, parts of the desert turned into short-lived oases. For the nomadic people who roamed this harsh land, these summer rains were everything. Their entire way of life revolved around cattle. When archaeologists opened the central tomb at Nabta Playa, they dug up cattle bones and even a massive rock carved into the shape of a cow. The people who built it used the stars to guide them and find hidden watering holes like Nabta Playa, which likely held water for about 4 months a year, starting with the summer monsoons. But there was no North Star back then, so instead they navigated using bright stars and the way the sky seemed to spin in circles above them. When the lakes were full, the standing stones would be partly submerged, and from the western shore, you would see the reflection of the stars on the dark water. Nabta Playa is way less famous than Stonehenge, perhaps because its stones were buried and the famous site in England was open to visitors for thousands of years. Sadly, when Nabta Playa did become famous, some tourists ruined parts of it by moving stones around, which messed up the ancient star alignments. To protect it, the authorities moved everything to a museum where people can see the stones and the carved cow statue without damaging them. The Egyptian Observatory isn't the only construction similar to Stonehenge. It has versions that were used for different purposes, from Germany and France to the US and the Andes in northern Peru. This last one is actually one of the oldest big structures ever built in this region. The circular plaza is made of 2 giant stone walls arranged in a ring. It was likely used for ceremonies and gatherings. Scientists have carbon dated it to be about 4,750 years old, which means it was built before the Great Pyramids of Egypt and Stonehenge. The plaza had 2 entrances and a special layer of clay, soil, gravel, and charcoal underneath. It was carefully planned and built. Archaeologists also found ceramic pieces, quartz crystals, and gemstones at the site, so it was definitely a special place. People visited it for centuries, but at some point it was sealed off, probably because of changing beliefs and traditions. The most recent discovery was the remains of a large timber circle roughly the same age and with parallels to Stonehenge, all the way up in Denmark. This open-air structure was likely part of a special area where prehistoric people from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age gathered for rituals and ceremonies. The circle was made up of 45 giant wooden posts, forming a huge ring about 100 feet wide. The wood is gone now, but scientists believe tall timbers once stood in the holes and created an impressive wood henge. No one knows exactly what these circles were used for, but archaeologists have found animal bones and food remains at similar sites. So people probably used to gather there for feasts and rituals. In 2024, scientists found 2 ancient stone circles from the Neolithic period in Dartmoor National Park in England. Some archaeologists believe they might form a sacred ark. Many of Dartmoor's stone structures were built in a curved shape on the high ground in the center of the area. A long time ago, Dartmoor was covered in forests, so people may have used the high ground as important markers. One of the newly found circles fits inside this ark, but the other one is outside of it, to the north. This could have been an entrance point into the ark. There's also a raised bank of earth near the stones, which looks similar to other famous Neolithic sites, like the Ring of Brodgar in Scotland and Stonehenge itself. This means the people who built these circles may have visited Stonehenge or been inspired by it. Archaeologists in Oman found ancient stone monuments called tralith, which got the nickname Arabian Stonehenge. They were finished about 2,000 years ago, but no one knows for sure who built them or why. Scientists also found stone hand axes that are incredibly old, between 300,000 and 1.3 million years old, from the time when the first humans left Africa. At another site in central Oman, archaeologists discovered a Neolithic tomb from around 5000 to 4600 BCE. There are 2 chambers with the bones of dozens of people inside beneath a giant megalithic structure. Nearby, they also discovered rock carvings that were made by people who lived in the area. And then there is another Stonehenge look-alike, this time in Saudi Arabia, that was used as an apartment complex thousands of years ago. Archaeologists discovered a total of 345 stone circles by looking at aerial photos of a lava field. Each circle is between 13 to 26 feet and has at least one large standing stone in the middle. These structures still have remains of stone walls and doorways. Stone circles like Stonehenge are often linked to ceremonies and rituals, but scientists say that many early houses were actually built in round shapes, and rectangular homes only became common much later in history.
Scientists have recently discovered Leonardo da Vinci's hidden passages under a medieval castle in Italy. They followed a newly found 15th century sketch by the creator of the Mona Lisa and found one of the unexplored architectural wonders from the age of the Renaissance. Construction of the Sforza Castle started back in 1358, but it was destroyed about a century later during a local crisis. Then, in 1450, Francesco Sforza, the Duke of Milan, decided to rebuild it on the old ruins. After he passed away, his son Ludovico took over and kept improving the castle. He brought in some of the best artists of the time, including Leonardo da Vinci, to decorate its walls. We can still see Leonardo's frescoes today in the Room of Wooden Boards. While he was working at the castle, da Vinci also recorded some historical underground passages hidden beneath the outer wall. The drawing, dated between 1487 and 1490, was found at the Institut de France in Paris. The sketch is highly precise, and it proves that Leonardo was really interested in fortification design and was great at documenting existing structures. Historical records show that Ludovico ordered the building of an underground passageway that led straight to a basilica, where his wife was buried. Ludovico married Beatrice in 1491, and they had a happy but tragically short marriage, as Beatrice passed away while giving birth in 1497. The Duke locked himself away for weeks, grew a beard, and wore only black clothes while he was mourning his beloved wife. The secret tunnel may have stretched over a half a mile and would let Ludovico visit her grave in private. It could have served as an escape route if the castle was ever under siege. The existence of the tunnels remained one of the mysteries of the Renaissance for years, as no one knew for sure they were there. But now, scientists finally uncovered the secret history. They used a combination of ground-penetrating radar and laser scanning to build up an accurate 3D model of all the structures under the castle. They found the tunnels Da Vinci alluded to in his drawings, and it looks like they may have only been a small part of a whole system of historical underground passages. The goal is to create a complete digital twin of the castle that will not only show all the preserved constructions, but also the ancient ones that are no longer visible. They also plan to add augmented reality to the virtual paths to let visitors discover Leonardo da Vinci's hidden passages. Now, we don't know if the genius actually took part in constructing the hidden passages that scientists recently discovered, but we do know about some other Leonardo da Vinci inventions. He created the first satellite-like map in 1502, long before photography or satellites were even a concept. A famous figure in Italy, Cesare Borgia, invited Leonardo to a small town called Imola, near Bologna, to create a highly detailed map for him. Back then, maps were not very precise, as no one had figured out how to show exact distances on a smaller scale. Instead, people spent a lot of time decorating them with dragons, roses, fancy castles, mountain ranges, flowers, and other artistic details. These maps look more like beautiful paintings meant to be displayed, rather than practical tools for navigation. But Cesare Borgia wanted something truly functional, and Leonardo managed to create something revolutionary in the field of cartography. If you compare satellite images of Imola today with Leonardo's map, the similarities are striking. He captured every alley, curve of the streets, roadways, and even the exact sizes of the buildings. And he did it all by hand, using just a pencil, ruler, compass, and several of his own clever inventions. To gather all the necessary data, the genius walked through the streets for weeks using a large wheel that spun as he moved, recording the distance with a cable. Using the magnetic compass, he determined precise directions. He also developed a tool called the bussola, which measured angles inside a circle. With this, he could track the exact turns of each street and the size of the intersections. He figured out the distances between houses and major roads. Then, back at home, he used his notes and calculations to draw the map to scale with incredible precision. In his work, Da Vinci also used a technique developed by Florentine humanist Leon Battista Alberti. He created a mapping method where you could place an entire city inside a circle using polar coordinates. At the center of the city, 8 straight lines met, representing the main directions of a compass. Leonardo used this system to divide the town into 8 sections. He didn't overlook even the smallest buildings, which made his map one of the most advanced of its time. The Italian genius had a big dream to build a machine that could let people fly. He studied how birds, bats, and kites move through the air and designed a special flying machine. He believed that if he could copy their movements, humans might be able to soar like them. Da Vinci's design looked a lot like a bat, with 2 large pointed wings that stretched over 33 feet wide. He planned to build the frame from lightweight pine wood and cover it with raw silk to make it strong but not too heavy. The person flying it would lie on their stomach on a wooden board in the center. To make the wings flap, the pilot had to pedal a crank with their feet, which was connected to a system of rods and pulleys. There was also a hand crank for extra power and even a headpiece to help steer. As the person moved their hands and feet, the wings would flap and twist, just like a bird's. But there was one big problem. Humans aren't strong enough to make the machine lift off the ground. Even though it might have worked once in the air, there was no way for a person to get it flying on their own. Leonardo probably realized this, but his amazing idea still inspired flying machines that came centuries later. Da Vinci was way ahead of his time with many of his inventions, but his idea for a humanoid robot was especially futuristic. He was working under the patronage of the Sforza family, the one that had those ancient tunnels of Italy built. The genius designed a mechanical knight that could move its arms, turn its neck, and even open and close its mouth. Da Vinci had good knowledge of anatomy and the mechanics of body movements that helped him. His unusual creation used an external system of cables. A hand crank set it in motion, and there was also an internal gear-driven mechanism. About 450 years later, Da Vinci's detailed sketches of the robotic knight were rediscovered in the 1950s. Several researchers tried to recreate the robot from those sketches. In 2002, a roboticist who developed systems for NASA and Lockheed Martin took inspiration from the old notes and built a functioning model of Da Vinci's robotic knight. Another design Leonardo created for Duke Sforza was a special kind of bridge that could be taken apart and carried easily. It was made for defense forces who needed to cross rivers or moats while traveling. This bridge would swing across the water and land on the other side. It had wheels and used a rope and pulley system, so it could be set up quickly and packed away just as fast. To keep it steady, it even had a special weight to help balance it. Leonardo wrote in his notes that the bridge was light yet strong, and he designed several bridges like this for the Duke. One of his other designs was a bridge that could be built very quickly, and the defense forces would move across multiple rivers. As scientists continue to study Leonardo da Vinci's hidden passages, they reveal new chapters in human history. Who knows what other unexplored architectural structures they will find?
You're flying over the Sahara Desert in a small, light aircraft when you spot something truly weird. It seems to belong to a very different part of the world, the ocean. But what ocean can be huge enough for this monstrous sea star to dwell there? You descend and realize that it's not a sea star. It's a towering dune with a pretty unique shape, and it's not alone. From afar, these magnificent sand structures look a bit like pyramids. They have pointed tops and radiating arms. Called star dunes, they're the most complex and largest desert dunes in the world. They're the tallest of their kind, but that's not the coolest thing about them. Researchers have found similar formations on Mars and even on one of Saturn's moons, Titan. Star dunes aren't super rare, but they're especially widespread in southeastern Morocco near the border with Algeria. That's where you're flying at the moment, and the breathtaking dune you're marveling at is Lella Lalia, probably the most famous of them all, a giant 330 feet tall. Scientists believe that it formed in less than 1,000 years. How about doing some research to find out more about these unusual formations? There, I see a great spot for landing. Star dunes got their name because of their multi-armed shapes. They form in areas where winds change direction throughout the year. But even though you can find them in different places on our planet, there is just one confirmed star dune in the rock record, the collective record of Earth's development reflected in preserved rocks. The star dune in question is in Scotland, and it's ancient, from about 250 million years ago. That's all we know about super old star dunes. Probably because we don't know what to look for to identify one. Another problem: star dunes often form in remote locations, which makes them extremely difficult to study. Imagine reaching the nearest settlement, then somehow traveling who knows how many miles to the dune itself, and then slogging up several hundred feet of shifting sand. I'll pass. But you can go since you've already landed, and the dune is right here in front of you. Currently, you're in a dune field called Erg Shabi. Lucky for you, this area has long become a popular tourist stop. Look, in the distance, there are hotels and even a good road. Scientists who examined Lella Lalia before you used ground-penetrating radar to find out more about the sand formation. This equipment can detect the tiniest differences in sand grain sizes and water content under the surface of the dune. That's how you can create a picture of its interior layers. Look out! Phew, it was a close call. See this trench? The researchers dug such trenches to take samples of long-buried sands and then examine them. It's a pretty cool process. The thing is, while buried deep inside, the quartz in the sand accumulates radiation coming from natural sources within our planet. We can compare the grains of quartz to minuscule rechargeable batteries. They can store the energy they get from radiation. When researchers bring them to the laboratory, they can make the grains release that energy, which comes out in the form of light. Scientists can measure the brightness and say when the sand enjoyed sunlight for the last time. Now, when those experts who dug the trenches looked inside Lelalalia, they were shocked. The enormous formation turned out to be very young, for a dune of course. You'd expect a dune that is several hundred feet tall to be pretty old, like thousands or tens of thousands of years. But that wasn't the case. Well, at least not entirely. The upper part of the dune has turned 900 just recently. But look at the sand near the base of the dune. Yep, right there. Well, it was buried there around 12 or 13,000 years ago, representing ancient dunes in the area. Those good old dunes were active for a couple thousand years, and then something went wrong. Because for a whopping 8,000 years, the sand wasn't accumulating there. A mystery? Scientists might have an explanation. You see, the first part of this quiet period occurred during the time when the climate became warm and wet. Yep, even in the Sahara. It happened about 11,700 years ago. It was the end of the last ice age and the beginning of a new era, the Holocene. And guess what? The Sahara went green. It started blooming like your local botanic garden. Plants started popping up all over the place, stabilizing the sand. If you had visited the Sahara during that period, you wouldn't have recognized this place. But you would have likely come across humans wandering marshy landscapes and hunting for food. Researchers have found pottery fragments and stone tools on one side of Lelalalia. That's true. As sand dunes form and then shift throughout their lives, they swallow and protect ancient remnants of life. Just dig well enough and you might find something that will provide you with a window into the past. It can be ancient fossils, anything from fossilized shells and corals to prehistoric plants. Those can offer precious insights into the history of our planet and the living beings once inhabiting certain regions. Now, it might come as a shock, but in the Sahara Desert, scientists have uncovered well-preserved marine reptiles and fossilized fish within the layers of those ancient sand dunes. They are the remains from the time when the Sahara was covered with a sea millions of years ago. Anyway, it's time to leave that ancient paradise if you want to survive. 4,000 years ago, the wet period came to an end, and the Sahara dried out again. Interestingly, our dune didn't begin building up right away. For some time, sand probably blew through but didn't accumulate. Or the dune could have started growing in a different location. And it's a valid theory since scientists have discovered recently that Lelalalia shifts around 1.6 feet every year. It also accumulates about 6,400 tons of sand every year. Now, if you've been inspired by your dune trip and are now eager to explore more of them, I've got some unpleasant news for you. Unfortunately, although there might be star dunes locked in sandstones around the globe, they're super tricky to detect. The problem is, dunes are huge, but they lack a single distinguishing feature. So you'd really need large exposed beds of rock if you want to get a wide enough view to identify a star dune. On the bright side, there surely are places where it might be possible to do such research, but you should be ready to know that it might be just a set of various features that look like other dunes. But if you combine them, you'll say, it's likely to be a star dune. Comment below if you'd like to go on a trip in search of a star dune. Meanwhile, we'll continue our journey. You decide to have some rest and start climbing down the side of the dune. That's when you begin hearing it. Terrible, haunting sounds. Are there ghosts nearby? Worry not, you're safe. You might have heard of a phenomenon called singing sands. As you walk down some sandy slopes, you disturb the grains of sand. They rub against each other, producing friction that creates those eerie melodies. With each step, the sand beneath your feet comes alive in a ghostly choir of whistles and whispers. The sounds range from low hums to loud, high-pitched wails, as if an otherworldly symphony is echoing through the dunes. But of course, scientists have their own very practical explanation, attributing this phenomenon to the right atmospheric conditions combined with the unique size, shape, and moisture content of the grains. Now you've almost made it all the way to the bottom of the dune, but beware of slip faces. When a sand dune reaches a certain steepness, it develops a slope. That's the very slip face I was talking about. This slope is usually on the leeward side of the dune and sheltered from the prevailing wind. Sand grains start accumulating on the windward side, slowly creeping along the dune's gentle slope. At one point, they reach the top. Gravity takes over and they start sliding down, triggering a cascading effect. It looks like a miniature sand avalanche, and I wouldn't want to end up in its way.
Okay, what if I tell you that the extraterrestrials we all imagine as little green men may actually look like very normal Earthlings and chill in Europe? This is the Iberian Peninsula, and people living there are under suspicion. Ooh. Here's the reason. Somehow, parts of the most important artifacts that the Iberian civilization called Treasure of Valena are made of metal that simply can't be found on Earth, because it's metal from a meteorite. Now let's tackle this step by step. This is the artifact itself, and it's composed of 59 different objects. Bowls, bottles, and bracelets. Is there a pattern there with all those bees? In total, the find weighs around 20 pounds, of which 18 pounds are 23.5 karat gold. Now, if you're not a metal specialist, I'll clarify it for you right away. For comparison, 23 karat gold is 95.8% pure gold, so 23.5 karat is even purer. The remaining percentage goes to other metals to help add strength and durability to the precious alloy. There was also silver, iron, and amber in that set. The artifact could have been pretty straightforward, but for these two, let's call them imposters. Look at this wrought iron bracelet and this hollow hemisphere. Can you see that? Those rusty lines on the hemisphere and the overall weird color of the bracelet do stand out, since everything else is made of purest gold. This all started back in 1963, when a researcher noticed a dark leaden metal among the shiny bowls and bottles. The metal was shiny in some areas and covered with a ferrous-looking oxide that was mostly cracked. Now, just so you understand, gold does not usually act this way. Gold is one of the least reactive of all metals, so it won't even tarnish, let alone rust. To figure out where this suspicious iron came from, researchers turned to mass spectrometry, which checks out the mass-to-charge ratio of molecules. Their findings showed that the nickel in the iron is similar to that found in meteoritic iron. Simply put, the bracelet and the hemisphere are of extraterrestrial origin. Ooh. Now, the exact age of the trove is hard to determine, yet it's crucial. We need to know the exact age to see if it coincides with the start of the Iron Age in the Iberian Peninsula. If it does, then no further questions here. But if it doesn't, well, it's, at the very least, weird, if not suspicious. So there's this three-age system. It comprises the Stone Age, then the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. The Stone Age is of no importance here, so let's compare the Bronze and the Iron Ages. The Bronze Age began when it was realized that combining copper and tin produced a material that was more durable than either metal alone. This era was all about major upgrades in tools and weapons, but two standout inventions were writing systems and the wheel. Then came the Iron Age. This time was all about slowly bringing iron into everyday life. Iron was way easier to shape into cool designs than bronze. Now, this was a big deal because iron, especially transformed into steel, provided significant improvements in all aspects of life. Tools became lighter, cheaper, and stronger compared to their bronze equivalents. You get it? Good. So, researchers have long debated whether the treasure dates back to the post-Argaric era or the latter part of the Bronze Age. The most recent study claims that those artifacts were created in 1400 to 1200 BCE, and something really doesn't add up. First off, the Iron Age began around 500 years after these artifacts were crafted. Plus, ancient craftsmen couldn't know back then how to work with metals that landed on Earth approximately 1 million years ago. And while the dates are really hard to explain, there is a logical explanation for the craftsmanship. The theory here is that those metal workers simply had access to the fallen meteorite, and thus they could study it well and discover its properties before using it for decorative purposes. They could have figured it out through trial and error, and once they knew exactly how to work with this extraterrestrial metal, they proceeded to adorn the artifacts with it. Plus, there were the Phoenicians, who contributed to their craftsmanship. Now, it's true that the Iberian people have been processing metal and making pottery long before the Phoenicians settled on the peninsula. But the arrival of new metalworking techniques and the introduction of the potter's wheel enabled them to produce better quality goods much faster than before. So, we figured out the extraterrestrial origins of the Iberian artifacts. But guess what? This area is still under suspicion. The reason for that is the language they spoke. You see, for most modern languages people use today, there will always be some proto-language. Say for Italian, Spanish, and French, it's Latin, hence their similarities. But wait, Iberian was largely spoken where modern Spain is, so why isn't Spanish similar to it? Well, the truth is, no language today is similar to the Iberian. Maybe only the Basque language, but it's because of some similarities found in their numerical systems. Basque is classified as a language isolate, or simply unrelated to any other known languages, and the only language isolate in Europe. The Iberian language is unclassified. While the scripts written in it have been deciphered to various extents, the language itself remains largely unknown. And look at the alphabet the Iberians had. Looks like it doesn't really belong to our planet. But hold up, this one might be a bit of a stretch. When the Phoenicians came to the peninsula, they brought along their alphabet to the Iberians. But honestly, the Iberians probably weren't keen on just copying someone else's writing system, so they tweaked it until it looked completely different. Let's just say they took some inspiration and ran with it. While linguists can guess to some extent how most characters sounded, actually translating the language is still completely impossible. The Iberian language was non-Indo-European and faded away over 2,000 years ago. And there aren't any similar languages left to help us out. Super frustrating, right? Yeah. We got over 2,000 Iberian inscriptions from tombs, coins, potteries, lead plates, and even cave wall carvings. But aside from a handful of words, we're totally in the dark about what they mean. Now, if we could understand their language, we might have learned that they were great thinkers and all, but we can only contemplate the works of art they left. Iberian culture has a lot of amazing stuff made by talented artisans. We're talking about not just metalwork and ceramics, but also detailed sculptures, textiles, jewelry, and other personal bling. But here's the catch. Making all those luxury items depended a lot on a big farming class. At the heart of Iberian society, most folks were involved in farming and taking care of livestock. Depending on where you were, the types of farming varied. For example, up in the north, they were all about growing grains, while down in Valencia, they focused on producing olive oil and other agricultural aspects. In the west, raising animals was the name of the game. Still, we don't have much information about the day-to-day lives of the many people doing this essential work. Yet, on the flip side, we know a lot about the upper class of Iberian society, who control these agricultural resources and hire the artisans. By the 7th century BCE, we start to see a group of Iberian princes who were living the good life, trading with the Phoenicians, and enjoying fancy luxury items. You can spot this elite class in their burial practices. Cremation was the go-to method for funerals among the Iberians, and wealthy individuals were often found in cemeteries with all sorts of lavish goods and funerary sculptures that give us a peek into the fashion and hairstyles of the rich. Interestingly, starting in the 6th century BCE, there was a noticeable drop in the number of recognizable burials, which suggests that these elaborate funeral customs became more exclusive to a small elite. Meanwhile, the fate of the majority, farmers, artisans, soldiers, and laborers, who made up a big chunk of the population, remains a bit of a mystery. It used to be a pretty advanced civilization, but it vanished without a trace. Researchers think it could have been due to some massive earthquake, but so far we don't know for sure. Egyptian archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery near Cairo just recently. Drumroll please. The most ancient and most complete mummy yet discovered in the country. Yes, they were keeping it under wraps. The 4,300-year-old mummy was found in a group of tombs close to the Step Pyramid of Djoser, dating back to the Egyptian Old Kingdom. It was covered in layers of gold. The team also found several other tombs, including one belonging to an ancient Egyptian official and another belonging to a secret keeper who had the power to perform special ceremonies. Another interesting tomb was that of a writer, which featured the largest statues ever found in the area. This vast burial site is also home to more than a dozen pyramids and resting grounds. Probably one of the most famous mummies in the world is that of Hatshepsut. She ruled Egypt like a boss for around 20 years, building all sorts of impressive buildings and creating new trade routes. But when archaeologist Howard Carter found her tomb in the Valley of the Kings, her sarcophagus was empty. However, Carter did find 2 coffins in another tomb, one of which belonged to Hatshepsut's wet nurse and the other to an unknown woman. In 2006, a team of specialists decided to investigate whether that mysterious lady was the queen herself. They found a molar tooth in a wooden box with Hatshepsut's name on it, and when they compared it to a gap in the mummy's mouth, it was a perfect match. Ramses II was a pretty impressive ruler, but it was his mummy that eventually made history. Now, we don't hear too much about his daddy. Okay, I'll stop. Ramses is considered to be the most powerful pharaoh in all of Egypt, as he reigned for a whopping 6 decades. He also lived to be over 90 years old. Now that's pretty amazing, considering the time he lived in. Ramses II supposedly had over 100 offspring too. Talk about a big family. When he passed away, his body was originally buried in the Valley of the Kings, but some sneaky guys tried to rob his tomb of all his treasures. Officials back in the day weren't having any of that though, so they moved his body to a secret location to keep it safe. Fast forward to the 1800s, and Ramses II's mummy was discovered along with a bunch of other rulers and important officials. But it wasn't in the best condition, so archaeologists flew it to Paris to get it, pampered. Problem was, he couldn't just be transported into another country. The only solution available was to give Ramses II his own passport. His occupation was listed as king, and the document even featured his photo. Most mummies aren't necessarily known for having the most hydrated skin. But that of an ancient woman, also known as Lady Di, proves otherwise. No, not that Lady Di. This wealthy lady from ancient times was discovered in an ornate tomb in 1971, and she looked fabulous, if we can say so about a mummy. Thanks to the special conditions in her tomb, like the moisture in the environment and the lack of oxygen, her body was almost perfectly preserved. Her skin was soft, her hair was on point, and she was still flexible. The museum that now proudly displays her mummy also shows a ton of fancy items that were buried with her, like dinnerware and musical instruments. Archaeologists investigated the mummy further and discovered that she passed away from a heart attack at around 50 years old. Even though it hasn't been around for over 2,000 years, Lady Di is still making history. The mummy of Otzi the Iceman was discovered in the Alps in 1991. Austrian authorities initially thought he was a modern mountaineer because he was so well preserved. Turns out, he was actually from the Copper Age. He was found in a mountain pass over 10,000 feet above sea level. Through studying his mummy, we've learned so much about life in Copper Age Europe. For example, we know that he was a native of Central Europe and enjoyed eating meat. He also suffered from arthritis, narrowing arteries, and intestinal problems. But he likely used acupuncture and medicinal herbs to treat these conditions. And apparently, he was pretty handy with tools. He sharpened them just days before his untimely demise. Who knows if he was expecting trouble or just getting ready for some routine work. Now, King Tut and his story is most likely the one that made all mummies famous. This pharaoh passed away at the young age of 19, more than 3,000 years ago, but his mummy is still one of the most well-known in the world. When his tomb was opened in 1922, people went wild because it was still intact, unlike many other royal tombs. It had some seriously blinged-out coffins, including one made of solid gold. Not only did Tut's tomb give us a glimpse into ancient Egyptian history, but his mummy also taught us a lot about the time he lived in. DNA analysis helped identify his parents and revealed that the pharaoh had a rare bone disorder that might have made walking a bit tough. Now, Ginger is most likely one of the coolest mummies you'll ever hear about. He's like a time traveler from 5,000 years ago who's still looking fly with his golden hair and perfectly preserved nails. Ginger was discovered in Egypt and is believed to be the earliest known mummified body. Before people even knew about mummification, they used to place bodies in shallow graves in the hot, dry sand. And since the sand absorbed all the water, bacteria couldn't reproduce and the body was preserved naturally. Now, scientists are not sure if Ginger's preservation was intentional or not, but since he was buried with some pottery vessels, it's likely that whoever buried him knew some serious preservation techniques. If you want to meet Ginger in person, he's currently chilling at the British Museum. One Dutch art collector bought a statue from Asia and ended up finding a weird discovery. The statue contained a mummy hidden inside. Unfortunately, the body was too fragile to move, so they had to leave it there. The coolest part is that this mummy is over 1,000 years old and was on display for 200 years before being encased in the statue. When scientists did a CT scan, they found out that the mummy was filled with paper scraps covered in writings. Experts think he might have done this thing called self-mummification, which is a pretty intense process involving a special diet and tea that makes your body less prone to bacteria. Only a few people could handle this ritual, and those who managed to do that were seriously respected. No other Egyptian queen has baffled scientists and historians like the stunning Nefertiti. Based on her statues, she was known for her slender neck, wide eyes, and high cheekbones. Her name translates to "the beautiful woman has come." Talk about living up to your name, huh? Even though she wasn't a pharaoh herself, Nefertiti still managed to leave a lasting impression. Written records suggest that, as a wife and queen, she held an incredibly influential role. Because of her power, she was indeed admired, but she also managed to make quite a lot of enemies throughout her life. She was also related to King Tut, but not biologically. Rather, she was his stepmother. So far, locals have yet to identify her mummy, but that may soon change. A local Egyptologist who has been busy excavating tombs in the Valley of the Kings has found two mummies that he believes could be Nefertiti and her daughter. According to specialists, we may soon finally get a definitive answer about the identity of these two mummies. And if one of them does turn out to be Nefertiti, we could be in for a real treat. DNA analysis and CT scans of the mummy could give us the most complete and accurate image of the queen that we've ever seen. It's crazy to think that we've only scratched the surface of what lies beneath modern-day Egypt. Nefertiti ruled during a time of great power and prosperity in Egypt, but unfortunately passed away in a period of social turmoil, leading to her gravesite being lost. Now, where's my mummy? Under the burning sun, among the sand dunes, somewhere in the Sahara Desert, you're walking in search of an ancient treasure. Finally, you find a strange rock in the sand. It's big, looks like a large piece of black coal or rock, but something shiny on its surface makes the rock unusual. This unique find is the oldest thing that has ever been discovered on our planet. This rock was born long before Earth appeared in outer space. The unusual meteorite was found in 2020 in a remote area of the Sahara Desert. Scientists have analyzed the isotopes of magnesium and aluminum on the stone's surface and found that its age is about 4.5 billion years. At the moment, this is the oldest sample of magma from space in history. It belongs to a small protoplanet that didn't have time to form completely. It happened a very long time ago when our solar system was forming. Many huge asteroids were floating in space. Some of them were formed into huge celestial bodies, which later became planets. The big rocky planets were absorbing the smaller ones. The rock was part of a little protoplanet that just began its formation, but another huge asteroid destroyed it. The planet shattered into billions of pieces. Some of them became part of other planets, some flew outside the solar system, and one piece that had been wandering in space until our Earth was formed. After that, it hit the planet's atmosphere and fell into the territory now known as the Sahara Desert. The rock was discovered in 2020, but the erosion of extraterrestrial rocks shows that it could have fallen much earlier. This ancient thing weighing around 70 pounds has several pieces of different meteorites inside. In simple words, it's a volcanic rock consisting of lava. It has cooled, solidified, and crystallized. That's why you notice the glitter. Scientists hope that further study of the rock will help to learn more about our solar system foundation. The biggest asteroid discovered in the U.S. is the Willamette. Its size is 84 square feet, and its weight is more than 15 tons. This is half the weight of a bus. Several people can fit on the surface of this outer space object. But the coolest thing is that it's not a rock like most meteorites that were found. Willamette is made of nickel and iron. This massive piece of metal was discovered in 1906. Now, the huge rock is kept at the American Museum of Natural History. The largest meteorite ever found is Hoba. It's located in Namibia, and people have never changed its position because it's too heavy. The weight of Hoba is 60 tons. It's heavier than a tank. The next space-related event occurred on February 28 in southwest England. On this day, a huge flash lit up the sky. Then there was a loud crash. Several residents opened the doors of their houses and noticed a black sooty spot on the lawn. They immediately guessed what had happened and reported the discovery to the British Meteorite Observation Network. If you ever find a meteorite, report it to some geological research or space center as soon as possible. The longer a space rock lies on the ground, the faster it loses its value. Rain, dust, snow, wind, scorching sun, all these factors damage the surface of the meteorite. It makes it difficult to study the celestial object. The meteorite found in England looks like coal, but it's way softer and more fragile. It most likely used to contain frozen water. The rock is part of a huge asteroid that plowed through outer space when our solar system hadn't fully formed yet. They found a unique combination of minerals inside the rock. It can help scientists learn more about the origins of the solar system and life on Earth. Now we're heading to Germany, to the small town of Nördlingen. A huge ancient meteorite's hidden here. It's very difficult to notice it unless you know the secret of this town. You're walking along the cozy little streets and looking at the buildings with beautiful architecture. You spend the whole day there and don't find anything that reminds you of a meteorite. To solve the mystery, you need to get out of town. So you climb a high hill and see that the city is located inside a pit. For a long time, locals were sure the house was located in the crater of an extinct volcano. If you look at the houses from a certain angle, you may notice an unusual shining coming from them. In the middle of the 20th century, a group of geologists came here and immediately declared that the crater doesn't look like a volcanic one. The town was built on a huge crater left by a meteorite. The huge celestial body fell here about 15 million years ago. It was so hot that the carbon bubbles inside instantly turned into small diamonds. When people were building this city, they didn't know they were using expensive stones, since the diamonds were hardly visible. The locals never attached importance to the fact that the city walls shine unusually in the sun. Now they believe this place was built from diamonds that had fallen from the sky. Our next stop is in the UK again. This time the rocks are of an earthly origin. The famous Stonehenge. People place circles of rocks here in a certain order. Everyone knows about this archaeological monument, but no one knows the reason for its creation for certain. Another construction built out of mysterious rocks was discovered just 2 miles away. It's called Superhenge. It's bigger, heavier, and takes up more space. Each plate here is 15 feet, which is about the height of 2 floors. Once, the stone stood vertically and formed a huge semicircle. But someone pushed the stones over about 4,500 years ago. It was a college prank. No, not really. That's why they couldn't be detected for a long time. Scientists still can't solve the mystery of Superhenge, but they believe the standing vertical stones were part of some huge monument. Some other amazing rocks are located in the south of Costa Rica. There are big ones, the size of a human, and there are smaller ones, the size of bowling balls. And they all have a perfectly round shape. These giant rocky spheres were created by people. It must have taken years of polishing using stone tools to get the perfect round shape. These balls are incredibly heavy, but can easily roll like a basketball. All the rocks are of a different age. Some of them were created about 2,500 years ago. Most of them are made of molten volcanic magma. Until now, scientists don't know for what purpose these stones were used. They were found in different parts of Costa Rica, near big cities. It's possible that ancient civilizations installed them specifically to show the greatness of local kings. Also, many experts believe the rocks were used as a tool for studying astronomy. The people who knew their purpose of the rocks had disappeared, and the history of the stones was lost along with them. Let's finish our journey with the coolest archaeological find. You're walking through the desert of Peru and climbing a low hill. You look down and notice the surface of the hill is covered with strange lines. You walk far away and see a huge cat on the hill. Such a drawing is called a geoglyph. Its length is around 120 feet, which is about half the size of a Boeing commercial jet. Archaeologists discovered the giant cat in 2020 and found out that it had been created somewhere between 200 and 100 BCE. This huge drawing is part of a mysterious group of different pictures. In addition to the cat, there are other animals, plants, and fantastic figures. All of them were found in the desert of Peru. The kitten was found by chance. Archaeologists didn't see it at first because natural erosion on the hillside had almost erased the silhouette.
The story of Pompeii is complete chaos as is, but to add a little fuel to this fire, we dug up some groundbreaking facts, and I mean that quite literally. Hear me out. What if it wasn't the scorching sea of lava that destroyed the city of Pompeii, but rather an earthquake that happened during the volcano's eruption? Rewind to over 2,000 years ago. The year is 79 BCE. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Mount Vesuvius decided to erupt. Pompeians were going on with their normal daily routines when lava started taking over. The flow of lava was so quick that most people didn't have anywhere to run. The disaster took the lives of around 2,000 people. The lava covered most of the city, which then turned everything to ashes. Pompeii was only discovered during the 16th century of our Common Era, when an architect commended a dig to divert a river. It's a very well-studied site nowadays, but something unusual recently caught the researchers' attention. Scientists were excavating a site called the House of Painters at work. They were examining a couple of skeletons when they saw something weird. The skeletons probably belonged to two men around the age of 50. The analysis showed these men had survived the first surge of lava in the city. But they didn't make it out due to this second unexpected part, the earthquake. The men probably took shelter at the House of Painters at work, but the walls crumbled down when the earthquake hit. The men were found in a protective posture, like they were trying to shield themselves from something that was going to fall above their heads. Plus, these skeletons were not found under the layer of volcanic ash, but on top of it, proving that they really did survive Vesuvius's sea of lava. It turns out this is not as rare as it seems. A volcanologist explained that the seismic activity during the eruption really made things worse in Pompeii. He said that this seismic chaos probably influenced the desperate choices of a lot of Pompeians in their final moments. This is not the first time the world heard of a possible earthquake in Pompeii. A guy named Pliny the Younger, who escaped the disaster and witnessed the whole thing, beat these scientists to it in his famous letters. Pliny the Younger was a lawyer and an important person back in ancient Rome. He was an eyewitness to the whole Pompeii disaster, and he wrote in one of his letters that the eruption was followed by a trembling of the earth. Researchers do agree that something never added up. Pompeii is known to have really well-preserved skeletons since the ashes kind of played an important role in preserving them. But the buildings were in horrible shape, making it hard to reconstruct the entire city as it once was. Pompeii was indeed one of a kind. It was one of the most vibrant and lively cities of the ancient Roman Empire. The city was huge. It could have been home to as many as 30,000 people in its heyday. The House of Fawn, for example, was a clear example of how rich Romans lived their lives in Pompeii. It was a huge house that even had 2 gardens inside, taking up the entire block. They looked like they were made of white marble, but it was actually painted stucco. It was clear to researchers that only aristocrats lived there. Then there was this famous forum. This is where most of the administrative part of the city life happened. It was made up of a lot of different buildings, like the Basilica, a hotspot for political and civil meetings, the Macellum, which was a market, and several temples. If we were visiting this back in the day, we'd see a bunch of men dressed in tunics. A few select ones would wear togas, those heavy white pieces of draped cloth that look like bed linen wrapped over the body. Togas were mainly used on special occasions since they were costly, hard to wash, and considered a traditional costume. Representatives running for office would use it during their campaign run so that commoners would identify them as candidates. One can't forget about the Villa of the Mysteries. Cool name, huh? It was called that way because of some mysterious frescoes found inside of it. Modern-day archaeologists still haven't figured out what the scenes painted are trying to depict. Probably some type of ritual or ceremony. By the way, a villa is simply a large suburban Roman-style house. It's not necessarily a super posh place where the rich and beautiful live. It's usually located on the outskirts of town, near the city's walls. The Villa of the Mysteries one in particular was found astoundingly well preserved in modern archaeological excavations. It even had a manufacturing area inside of it, like its own little industry. It was common for richer Romans to own big farmlands, like olive gardens, for example. So they would also build a processing station inside their villas to extract the oil and package the whole thing. The amphitheater was where some of the richer men paid to put on gladiator fights for the rest of the town. It was built around 70 BCE, and it was one of the oldest amphitheaters of the world. It was even older than the Colosseum in Rome. This huge building could fit around 20,000 spectators at once. The seating was arranged by social class, so you could easily spot who was a member of the nobility. And in case you're wondering why it was shaped like a weird egg, it's because that was the shape that allowed for an unobstructed view wherever you were in the crowd. As every other Roman city, Pompeii also had some famous baths. Since not every house had access to plumbing back in the day, most people didn't shower in their homes. That's why so many Romans would use public baths, usually at the end of the day, to clean themselves. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a place for bathing, it was a cultural hotspot. The baths were made up of many different rooms. The first one was like a locker room, where people would keep their clothes and personal belongings. This is where the upper and lower classes mingled together. Someone's class could easily be identified by their clothes and jewelry. The amount of gold and silver worn back in those days is nothing compared to what most people wear today. Usually, the rich folks would leave someone to take care of their belongings while they went and took their bath. Because yes, it could happen that stuff went missing while chilling and relaxing. The big focus on self-care nowadays was already a thing for ancient Romans. It was common that before taking a bath, olive oil was rubbed all over the skin. They would scrape off the dirty skin with a strigil. That may sound weird, but also extremely pleasing. The baths had rooms for massages. Some of them had reading rooms, and even courtyards for some healthy exercise. Oh, there was even a natatio, or swimming pool if you're not fluent in Latin. After all, it was the Romans that said, a healthy body is a healthy mind. The bakeries. Bread was one of the main components of Pompeian diet, so much so that there were around 30 bakeries in the city. Bread was freshly made from scratch every day. In a special area of the shop, the corn or wheat was ground, and mules would circle around to keep the mills going. The funny thing about Pompeians is that they like to cover the exterior walls of buildings with paintings, much like graffiti nowadays. Their paintings, usually frescoes, used to depict what daily life was like in the city. ancient Romans were very outdoorsy people, so coloring their walls seemed like a good option for them. A lot of houses had frescoes inside of them too, to make up for the lack of windows. The paintings gave the house owners the illusion of more space if the painting was of, let's say, a garden, for example.
Now, have you ever seen cricket balls that are 3 billion years old? Klerksdorp spheres were found in deposits of the mineral pyrophyllite in South Africa and rock the science world. They do look like tiny ancient cricket balls with seams-like lines around the middle. Back in the 1980s, some folks claimed these spheres had been made by an advanced pre-flood civilization we know nothing about. One museum curator shared stories about how they rotated on their own in a display case. There was also a TV show that invited a psychic who declared the spheres were pieces of an ancient spaceship. But according to geologists, these spheres are actually pretty common concretions or spherical objects formed by different minerals than the surrounding rock. The seam-like lines are just imprints from the host rock's layers building up over time. The Klerksdorp spheres come in different shapes, from noticeably flattened spheres to distinct discs. As for that episode when one of these spheres spun on its own, the curator of the Klerksdorp Museum cleared that up too. He said that when he put one sphere on its glass shelf when a journalist came to visit, the sphere naturally rotated a bit because it's round. The area where the museum is located often experiences earth tremors from gold mining activities nearby. The oldest known human-like footprints could be 6 million years old. They were found on the Greek island of Crete in 2002. If the number is correct, it would mean that early human ancestors may have migrated between Europe and Africa much earlier than we previously thought. This doesn't mean Africa is not the cradle of humankind, though. It could just prove that early human ancestors moved back and forth between continents. Some researchers believe the footprints were left by a bipedal creature possibly related to an early human ancestor nicknamed El Greco. According to scientists who studied them, the footprints have a very human-like shape, with 5 toes and a parallel big toe. Some scientists are skeptical about it and suggest the prints might be from a late European ape. The new study analyzed fossilized marine microorganisms found in the sedimentary rocks to determine the footprint's age and prove it's actually 6 million years. The next amazing find that keeps scientists entertained is the Dorchester plot. It's a beautifully crafted metal vessel with some fancy geometric designs embossed in shiny silver. The pot was discovered in, who could have thought, Dorchester in 1852 under quite unusual circumstances. During a powerful blast, the pot broke into 2 pieces. Scientists believe it was originally embedded within a rock or boulder known as pudding stone. The rock from which the Dorchester pot emerged is dated to be around 500 million years old, so it could mean the pot itself is also that old. The current and less exciting theory suggests that the Dorchester pot is a Victorian-era candlestick holder. Such things were really trending back then, so it's not a surprise to find such fancy household item from that time. The Dorchester pot falls into the category of ooparts, or out-of-place artifacts. Those are objects that seem too advanced for the time period they're supposedly from. If we accept that the pot is 500 million years old, then whoever made it was way ahead of their times in terms of crafts and tech. One extra mystery is that the pot has an engraving of a plant that most likely disappeared from Earth over 100,000 years ago. Sounds like good proof the pot is really extra old. Now, it looks like the oldest map in Europe is a stone from 4,000 years ago. This Bronze Age slab was found in France in the year 1900 at an ancient burial ground. The carvings on the slab show in 3 dimensions the River Odey network with a fantastic accuracy of around 80% over an 18-mile stretch. There are other stone-carved maps around the world, but this one is unique because it shows a specific area to scale. Looks like the slab's carvings don't just map rivers and hills, but also settlements, barrow sites, and field systems. Archaeologists say the slab wasn't used for navigation, but rather to symbolize power. The detailed markings on the slab might have served to illustrate the domain of a local ruler, possibly a prince or king, to show their control over the territory. When the ruler lost power, the slab was likely repurposed as part of a burial vault. The unique artifact was stored in the cellar of a museum. For decades, no one even noticed until several scholars read older reports about the slab and decided to check it out. They conducted a detailed analysis using 3D techniques. Their research proved that the creators of the slab had not only etched lines into the rock, but also modified its surface to reflect the topography of the landscape with high accuracy. The Salzburg cube, also known as the Wolf's Egg Iron, was discovered in the late 19th century in Austria. Now, don't let the name mislead you. It doesn't look like a cube at all. It's more like a rounded object with two flat sides. Down the middle, there's a groove, and the surface is covered with pits and craters. This unique appearance is the reason why many people think it might be something out of this world. Workers accidentally found this artifact when they blew apart a piece of coal. The coal seam it came from is thought to be over 60 million years old. The Salzburg cube moved between museums, mysteriously vanished in the early 20th century, and then showed up again. A professor from Bonn University suggested it might be from a meteor, but they found no evidence of elements that you'd normally see in meteorites, like cobalt or nickel. Then researchers thought it must be a human-made object, possibly a Victorian-era candlestick holder. No one knows the true story of the cube or its current location. Yep, it disappeared again. Have you heard about the Meister print? It's a fossilized sandal print discovered in 1968, and it has sparked a lot of intrigue. There's a trilobite inside the print, which supposedly went extinct around 500 million years before humans even existed. But many historians think this age is an exaggeration. When Meister found the fossil, it was authenticated. But the scientist who did it didn't confirm it was a human sandal print. He only agreed there was a trilobite there. When another scientist visited the site, he found a 6-inch impression he believed was from a child's moccasin. But the footwear seemed to be new. So, could it be evidence of time travel? Proof that humans existed millions of years earlier than we thought? Or a sign that someone else visited early Earth? Or is it just a rock formation that looks like a sandal print? We still don't have the answers. Back in June 1936, a couple was walking along Red Creek in London, Texas. London, Texas? Yeah, when they stumbled upon something unusual. It was a piece of wood sticking out of what seemed to be an ancient rock formation. About 10 years later, their curious son decided to crack open the rock to see what was inside. And he saw a hammer, which looked surprisingly modern. Then, one unique finds enthusiast decided that the rock encasing the hammer was from the Cretaceous period. This would mean that someone dropped a 19th century hammer while dinosaurs like Triceratops were still roaming the earth. So, if this hammer was truly from the Cretaceous period, then the whole evolutionary theory would be wrong. And if the hammer was modern, it would mean the Cretaceous rock formation it came from was much younger than we thought. But the real answer was much simpler. The hammer was indeed modern, and geological processes had encased it in rock. Minerals can harden around an object in a relatively short time. So the hammer was probably dropped by a miner a century or so ago, and the rock formed around it afterwards. And no, it wasn't a Victorian-era candlestick holder either. There once was a kingdom where the ancient Egyptians traveled to buy gifts for pharaohs, sort of like an ancient shopping mall. This kingdom, named the Land of Punt, was rich in luxury goods, including gold, aromatic resins, blackwood, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals like leopards and baboons. All of these sound like great gift ideas to me. The Land of Punt was an especially important trading partner for Egypt for over 1,000 years. But if you plan to go there, the bad news is that it hasn't survived to these days, and nobody knows for sure exactly where Punt was located. We only know about it from records. The most famous of them were left on the walls of the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, who had sent an expedition to Punt. Scientists have been trying to find the exact location of this rich land for over 150 years. It could have been southeast of Egypt, in a coastal region south of it along the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean, or it could have covered the Horn of Africa and the area across the sea in southern Arabia. Now researchers were finally able to narrow down the possible locations thanks to a study of baboon mummies. Ancient Egyptians admired baboons and even thought they were related to the deity of the moon and wisdom. One species, the sacred baboon, was often shown in wall paintings, sitting with its tail curled to the right, and was mummified in this position. Another type, the olive baboon, was wrapped up in one giant cocoon. Both types were found in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. But if you remember geography lessons, baboons just don't wander around Egypt, so they must have been brought there through trade with other regions. Primatologists, Egyptologists, geographers, and geochemists look at the mummified baboons from two different time periods in ancient Egypt. Some were from the New Kingdom period, and others were from the Ptolemaic period. The scientists did some more hard work and analyzed tissues from 155 baboons from 75 separate places in Eastern Africa and Southern Arabia. Those were all areas that they thought could be the ancient land of Punt. They measured oxygen and strontium in the baboons' bodies. When animals drink water and eat plants, their teeth, hair, and bones show a geographic signature of where they've lived, thanks to these elements they contain. Scientists use a special method called isotopic mapping and found out that the New Kingdom baboons they analyzed came from a location in Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia. 5 mummified baboons from the Ptolemaic period had strontium levels that matched those found in Egypt. So, ancient Egyptians might have had a special place to breed and keep baboons, probably in Memphis, a city in Lower Egypt, not Tennessee. Meanwhile, paleontologists from New Zealand got lucky, as some boulders had split open from the tide and revealed fossils of the largest penguin that has ever lived on Earth. The scientists used laser scanners to make 3D models of the ancient penguin bones. They compared these bones to the flipper size of modern penguins and did some math as to how much the old penguins might have weighed. Today, the biggest penguins, emperor penguins, weigh between 55 to 100 pounds. Researchers think that the penguins from the past that they found weighed around 340 pounds, real giants in the penguin world. These huge flightless birds lived in the oceans around New Zealand more than 50 million years ago, after the dinosaurs went extinct. They totally took advantage of their big bodies to stay warm in the cold water. They might have even traveled the world thanks to it. And they'd scare off any predators, but they didn't have any. The asteroid that took down the dinosaurs also got rid of most big marine reptiles, and the ancestors of seals and whales were still living on land. Back in 1992, 4 farmers in China were draining water from their ponds and accidentally bumped into a ship full of gold and ancient statues worth millions. Just kidding, they actually found the Longyu Caves. Those are 24 big caves created by people a long time ago. Even though they are so large and well-made, no one knows who built them, why they were built, or how they were built. Experts think the caves are at least 2,000 years old, but they don't understand why these caves aren't mentioned in any historical records. All of the Longyu caverns look the same and aren't connected to each other. Each cave has one entrance connected to a vertical shaft with a carved staircase. Rain and water from the surface can flow into the caves through these stairs. To manage this water, the caves have special grooves, channels, and a system to catch the water at the bottom. So it looks like the ancient builders were real pros when it came to drainage and water management. Maybe my town could learn a lesson from them, as it turns into Venice after every heavy shower. Anyway, the caverns were built below a hill, named after a bird that is one of the most respected creatures in Chinese mythology and culture. It symbolizes all the best things, like high virtue, grace, and the union of yin and yang. Scientists think there could be a connection between the caverns and the bird, but it's just a theory so far. Experts from the National Institute of Ocean Technology in India were doing their routine pollution surveys when they found some structures that looked like a city underwater. Using special sonar technology, the team found big geometric shapes on the ocean floor. They brought up different items from the site, like pottery, beads, sculptures, parts of walls, and even human bones and teeth. They thought the ruins belonged to a civilization older than the Bronze Age Indus Valley Civilization, which is the earliest urban culture of the Indian subcontinent that we know of so far. But not everyone joined in on celebrating this awesome discovery. Some archaeologists refused to believe it and thought it could be some computer tricks. And even when they saw hundreds of artifacts from the ocean floor, they said an ancient river could have brought them there from someplace else. The team that discovered the underwater site decided to prove they were right. They chose a piece of wood as their main evidence. They tested it and found it was 9,500 years old. That could be the age of the entire site. Skeptics still insist that we can't rewrite all human history because of one piece of wood. Even 23 years since the discovery, no one is sure about the final answer. This is partly because it's hard to explore the site. It's in extremely dangerous waters with strong currents and riptides. During the cool Antarctica summer, from late November through January, geologists from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee climbed the frozen slopes of the McIntyre Promontory in the Transantarctic Mountains. High above the ice fields, they looked through the mountain's gray rocks for fossils from when the continent had green forests. By the end of their trip, the geologists found fossil pieces from 13 trees. These fossils show that the trees are over 260 million years old. This means the forest grew at the end of the Permian period before the first dinosaurs even appeared. More than 90% of all species on Earth disappeared back then, including the polar forests. These trees would have been very tough if they grew in Antarctica and could have survived. But a huge increase in gases like carbon dioxide and methane must have taken them down. This Antarctic forest is a terrific way for us to see what life was like before the extinction, and we might even understand what caused it. It also shows us how plants were different back then from those we are used to now. A remote survey vehicle, Okeanos Explorer, found this mysterious golden orb in the Gulf of Alaska, about 2 miles deep underwater. No one can say what this thing is. It's a strange object just 4 inches wide, and it was firmly stuck to some rock. When you touch it, it's smooth, soft, feels like flesh. You can even see a hole in it, as if something escaped from there. But what? Divers brought the mysterious orb to the lab from the Pacific Ocean. They felt like in the beginning of a horror movie, almost as if you poked this thing, something would jump at you. This could happen if they had found it sooner. The hole in that orb means something alive tried to get inside or break out from inside, which is why scientists assume that this is an egg. We might have discovered a new species, or a new life stage of some species we already know. Some species do lay their eggs on the ocean floor, like squids. Although, if that's the case, then these animals might be gigantic, because that egg is huge. But maybe it's not an egg. Maybe it's a sponge. They found this thing surrounded by white coral, where sponges usually vibe. Just months before this discovery, scientists found more than 5,000 new marine species in a tiny space between Hawaii and Mexico. The Gulf of Alaska is home to 52 more species, with tons yet to be identified. So maybe it's just one of those sponges we haven't discovered yet. Or it might be a coral, or something entirely different. The only thing scientists know for sure is that the thing is a living organism. They're planning to move the orb to a more advanced lab to conduct DNA testing and reveal more about it. And it's not our first horrifying discovery from the oceans. In 2013, 2 rare locomotives were discovered under 90 feet of water off the coast of New Jersey. Scientists think that both of them were lost in the 1850s. For something that's been underwater for 160 years, they're in very good shape, even with layers of rust and barnacles. You can even see their smokestacks, and they sit upright, as if ready to pull into a station any minute now. They're not sure where these locomotives came from. There's no historical record of them being built or lost, which makes their discovery even more mysterious. They have strangely rare steam engines, both about 15 tons, lying 5 miles off Long Branch. The engine models were already outdated even back when these trains were made. They were small and powerful, but were only produced for a short time. Perhaps they were on a journey from Boston to the mid-Atlantic. Then a storm struck. It caused them to either fall off a barge or to be deliberately pushed off to save the ship. Scientists want to restore the locomotive to learn more about them. And this isn't the only gift to the seas humans left behind. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, has found the Apollo 11 F-1 rocket engines in the ocean. During the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, the Saturn V rocket used 5 powerful F-1 engines in its first stage. Each of them produced 1.5 million pounds of thrust. They burned 6,000 pounds of fuel per second, 1.5 million times that of a regular car. These engines burned for a few minutes before falling back into the Atlantic Ocean. Jeff Bezos got inspired by this story and began the search for those engines about a year ago. The team used an advanced deep-sea sonar. They finally found the engines 14,000 feet below the ocean surface. Scientists aren't sure what the conditions of the engines will be. They did have a super-fast impact with the ocean after all, and then laying over 40 years in salt water. But they were built from very tough materials, so hopefully we'll be able to study them. Ideally, Bezos wants to recover them. They're still a NASA property, but he hopes to display them in museums like the Smithsonian or the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Can you imagine finding the famous yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz at the bottom of the ocean? This thing looks like a man-made road, but believe it or not, it's a natural volcanic structure. Divers were exploring underwater volcanic mountains called seamounts in Hawaii. They wanted to investigate a split in the Seamount Trail. They live-streamed their journey and suddenly stumbled upon something fascinating, a pattern of cracks in the seabed that looks like a brick road. They used a robotic arm to pick up the rocks. The rocks had distinct rectangular blocks separated by straight lines and right angles. Someone joked that it might be a road to Atlantis, and another called it a yellow brick road, hence the name. But after some study, scientists discovered that this dry lake bed was made by super-energetic ancient volcanic eruptions. This is actually fractured hyaloclastite rock. Since the volcanoes were going crazy, they heated up and cooled down repeatedly until they created this unique cobbled pattern. On June 20, 2011, the OceanX diving team discovered something extremely weird. They were searching for treasure in the northern Baltic Sea in the Gulf of Bothnia. Instead, they found an anomaly. The thing, dubbed the Baltic Sea Anomaly, logically, looked very weird and unnatural. The anomaly is almost 200 feet wide. It looks like a mushroom rising about 10 to 13 feet from the seabed. It also has a huge disc shape, twice the size of a football field. The main part of the anomaly has straight edges and box-like structures. The top has cracks filled with some unknown black material, and it's not made of metal. The object lies about 300 feet deep in the Gulf's waters. The main mystery is why it's there. This discovery did create buzz in mass media. Some people started saying that it might be a sunken extraterrestrial ship, the remains of Atlantis, or a portal to another world. These claims got even more support when we found weird pavement-like platforms surrounding the object. It kind of looks like a staircase. And on top of that, explorers reported that their electrical equipment, like sonar instruments and satellite phones, malfunctioned near the thing. And it's not even some random reports. Researchers from different institutes said that as well. But scientists think that this is most likely a natural geological formation, even if it doesn't look like it. Although they can't really explain what that formation is supposed to be. They have many theories. It could be linked to human evolution, a glacial deposit from the Ice Age, a result of volcanic activity, and so on. Maybe it's even the remnants of an asteroid that landed on the seafloor thousands of years ago. But none of these theories explain why electronic equipment stops working near it. Who knows? Maybe we'll learn the truth someday. But how about technologies that came to us from the distant past? This strange thing is often called the first known analog computer. It's called the Antikythera mechanism. We discovered the mechanisms in 1901 near the Greek island of Antikythera. It might be from around 87 BCE. They found it in a shipwreck, in incredibly good shape for being so old. The thing was super complex. Machines of similar complexity didn't appear anywhere in the world until the 14th century. There was also a mysterious lump. When they separated into multiple fragments, they found inscriptions inside. They were hard to read because of all the corrosion, but when they deciphered it with X-ray, they discovered that these were the instructions, telling how exactly to use it. Wow, what a gift to archaeologists! So, it turns out the mechanism was made to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades ahead. Ancient scientists used this computer to track the 4-year cycle of athletic games, similar to the ancient Olympics. The mechanism had a very intricate structure of 37 bronze gears that tracked the movements of celestial objects. But at least here, we know that these things were made by humans, right? Now, we wouldn't call this island mystical unless there were tales of giants living here. The island of Gozo in Malta is the backdrop of an ancient legend. Malta is an island country located in the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Europe. It's a very strategically located archipelago. Throughout history, it was ruled by many different societies, such as the Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, and Carthaginians. One cold night, thousands of years ago, a farmer noticed the sky turn orange, then red, when he heard a loud thump. Although the ground seemed to be moving, this wasn't an earthquake. When he looked toward the woods, he saw a giant silhouette, taller than the trees. As he fearfully approached, he realized it was a woman, a giant woman. She introduced herself as Sansuna. Unlike the terrible giants of many tales, Sansuna didn't want to exterminate the human race. She was loving and caring. She told the farmer that she and her people could help protect their land from invaders. The locals were pretty interested in this offer. Since Malta is located in an important commercial route, it was constantly being invaded. The story says that Sansuna settled in Malta, and sooner rather than later, she was moving things around. And when I say things, I mean monoliths. Sansuna carried huge stones on her shoulder to build a magnificent temple called Gigantia, which means place of giants. She even did this while holding her half-giant, half-human kid on the other shoulder. Some say Sansuna lived exclusively on beans and honey, although others replaced honey with water. The funniest bit here is that Malta is the 10th smallest country in the world, but it somehow managed to host giants. Hey, go figure. The temple looked like a giant game of Tetris, with some stones weighing as much as 20 elephants. Some of these monolithic rocks are so heavy, scholars guess it would take 50 men working together to lift just one stone. Now, as much as this is entertaining, humans never proved giants were real, so this story couldn't be true. There's a brief mention of a species of giants called the Nephilim in some ancient texts. The Nephilims would have been terrible giants that wreaked havoc on the earth and only survived until the Great Flood. But nobody ever found real proof of this species really existing on Earth, until this came along. The world of Maltese archaeology unearthed quite a few shocking things in the past years. One of them are known as the hypogeum skulls. Hypogeum is the Greek word for underground, and this incredible site was discovered in the first decade of the 20th century. Back then, Malta's National Museum director received an important phone call. Someone had accidentally dug some impressive bones and asked him to come check it out. The hypogeum looked like an underground city, filled with mazes and rooms that stretched along multiple floors. They were all made with similar limestones as the Maltese temples above ground. The hypogeum was filled with important relics and artifacts. Scientists quickly understood that the hypogeum was built as a type of final resting place for locals. So, along with skulls, they found a lot of bones and skeletons. One of these artifacts were skulls, but these weren't regular human skulls. Rather, they were of the elongated type. To make matters worse, these skulls were hidden from the public for years. People started to talk and created a bunch of theories behind it. The truth is that this discovery was a turning point for Maltese archaeology, although scientists didn't know what to do with it. Some wondered if these skulls were natural or manipulated, since they knew some cultures in the world used head binds to alter their skulls. Other scientists threw in the hypothesis of little gray people or even the legendary giants. Some say that the elongated skulls could have been sculptures that worshipped otherworldly deities. There was no way to confirm any of these theories. So the question remained: who were the builders of Malta's megalithic temples? Now let's take a look at what scientists know. The Maltese megalithic temples have been standing strong since 3500 BCE, which is even older than the pyramids of Egypt. The main dilemma here is that these temples were built even before we invented writing, yet they required advanced technological skills to exist. The Gigantea Temple seems too absurd to have been built by humans. The South Temple has a corridor with 4 oval rooms on the sides, looking like a big shamrock leaf. In one of these rooms, scientists found altars decorated with spiral patterns. It looked like an altar of some sort, indicating early Maltese people used them for ritualistic purposes. The North Temple is similar but smaller, with a very low entrance that makes people crouch down to get inside. You get it? You need to bow down to their deities in order to get into this sacred place. I mean, one can't help but wonder about the secret reasons these ancient builders had to build such a huge temple. I'm thinking they probably cast one of Daenerys' dragons to move the monoliths around. Yeah, I'm joking here. But hey, remember the entrance to King's Landing? Yup, the series used the Medina Gates in Malta as the exterior of King's Landing during Episode 3 of Season 1. Anyways, back to the giants. The ritualistic theory of the whole thing won a few points when archaeologists uncovered these mysterious figures. They're popularly known as fat ladies. These tiny statues have round bodies and faces that show how much they enjoyed life. They kind of look like a miniature Sunzana, the giantess we talked about. Scientists believe these were statues that celebrated well-being and prosperity. It does prove that the people of the time had advanced craftsmanship skills, and they were pretty intentional with their constructions and art manifestations. One of these statues is known as the Sleeping Lady. This Neolithic piece of art depicts the figure of a large woman lying on her side sleeping. After studying it deeper, scientists guessed this statue was meant to represent the Great Reaper. It was found in the hypogeum, which we now know is a huge resting place. This specific statue is different from all the other fat ladies, starting with the hair and the embroidered skirt. Then there's this statue. This is supposed to represent an 8-foot-tall woman and the rim of her skirt. She was discovered in the most unusual of ways. A farmer was trying to plow his field, but he kept hitting large blocks of stone. All the way back in 1915, the farmer called Malta's National Museum director and asked him to come check it out. Some think this is all the proof you need to confirm that Sunsana was real. Others aren't all that sure. But that's not all. The place where this giant statue was buried revealed one of Malta's most impressive archaeological sites, the Tarsian Temples. The temples were made from limestone blocks. Some are 20 feet tall and weigh around 20 tons. Zamet, the museum director, kept digging and discovered multiple sites made of megalithic stones. All of them supposedly built by Stone Age farmers, all stranded on a remote island in the Mediterranean Sea thousands of years ago. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, look at these temples in Manidra. This is probably the world's earliest calendar. On the equinoxes, the sun passes directly through the main doorway, straight down the central axis. On the solstices, there are 2 superb variations. During the summer solstice, the rays fall on the edge of the megalith to the left of the doorway, and during the winter, the rays fall to the right side of the doorway. It's astronomical precision at its finest. And what about the structures in the Hall Tarsian that we've already talked about? This complex is the oldest one in all of Malta. It was built with the purpose of doing animal offerings to deities. Scientists confirmed this by unearthing numerous animal bones buried in the soil. They also found a great collection of spirals, indicating that the locals also used this temple for ritualistic purposes. Overall, there are 7 megalithic temples in Malta, each more impressive than the other. Scholars keep on digging to see if they can uncover the truth, much like researchers do with the pyramids of Egypt, the lost Mayan cities in the Americas, and other sites. They found the tomb of a royal doctor who lived over 4,000 years ago, a man who held pharaohs' lives in his hands. This man knew secrets that only deities and kings were allowed to hear. And yet, when they opened his tomb in 2024, there was no body, just vivid paintings, untouched by time, and cryptic symbols carved into stone. Who was he, and why was he buried with spells linked to a scorpion deity? The tomb was buried deep beneath the sands of Saqqara. The doctor's name was Tete Nebefu. He lived around 4,100 years ago, during one of Egypt's most mysterious turning points, right at the edge of glory and collapse. These were the final days of Egypt's Old Kingdom. The sun still glinted off freshly built pyramids, but the shadows were already creeping in. The pharaoh, Pepi II, had ruled longer than anyone before him, 90 years. But by the end of his reign, the country was cracking. The power was slipping, the regional leaders were rising, and the Nile floods grew unpredictable. In this shaky period, the mysterious doctor thrived. His tomb was discovered by a Swiss-French archaeological team in the shadows of old pyramids. The weirdest part was that when they uncovered his burial chamber, they found no body, no golden treasures either. Unfortunately, the tomb had been robbed long ago. But what remained was something even more fascinating: the words and images left on the walls. The paintings are still vibrant, bright colors that somehow survived all those years underground. The walls show jars, containers, strange abstract patterns, and geometric shapes. And then there are hieroglyphs, lines and lines of sacred script carved with precision, like someone had poured their soul into every curve. These inscriptions revealed who Teti Nebefu truly was. Turns out, he wasn't just any doctor. He was the conjurer of Serket. Now, Serket was the female deity of scorpions, sacred and terrifying. Egyptians believed she could stop venom, heal bites, and protect the living from toxic elements. The title, Conjurer of Serket, meant Tete Nebefu was a specialist in treating dangerous stings and bites. And if he got an entire tomb for himself, he may have been Egypt's top expert in those things, a man who healed with both medicine and magic. But that wasn't all. He also held the title Director of Medicinal Plants, a title seen only once before in all of ancient Egypt. That means he knew the healing power of herbs, roots, and oils like no one else. Now, you might wonder, what plants in a huge land of sand? But in reality, ancient Egyptians used herbal medicine that would hold up in some labs today. They created pills, ointments, and inhalers. Most often, they chose some active ingredient, a flavor to make it easier to take, and something to deliver it into the body. Sound familiar? And yeah, they didn't have many traditional plants, so some of these ingredients were bizarre by our standards, like using crocodile dung and acacia mixed with honey. They even had formulas for anti-wrinkle creams. And apparently, our mysterious healer was also chief dentist. This title is almost never seen in ancient records. Evidence of Egyptian dentists is incredibly rare. Turns out, our ancient genius didn't just fight stings and study plants. He was also trusted with teeth and jaws, which were actually a huge problem in ancient Egypt. These people may have built wonders, but their teeth paid the price. Ancient Egyptians constantly caught grains of sand in their mouths. They often ate grit-filled bread and raw vegetables, which wore down enamel and caused a horrible condition called attrition. This led to tons of problems, including tooth loss. They had to improvise back in the day. For example, crafting the world's oldest known toothpaste from crushed rock, mint, and pepper, which ironically only made things worse for the gums. Or a toothpaste from things like eggshells, pumice, and natron, a salty mineral used for cleaning. They were also inventing mouthwashes from celery, bran, and herbs to ease the problem. Some mummies were even found with crude metal braces and gold wires attaching missing teeth. Though we're not sure if these were for the living, or was it just a nice little addition added as an afterlife gift. So, Teti Nebefu specialized in all these fields. 3 rare titles for one man. Now, back in the day, he must have been admired as incredibly knowledgeable. In a world without modern science, He would have been like a sorcerer who knows how some leaf or bark could save a life. That's why archaeologists believe Tete Nebi-Fu wasn't just any doctor. He was, most likely, the royal physician, the one who treated the pharaoh himself. We don't know for sure which king he served. Maybe it was Pepi II, and who knows, maybe that's why the guy lived so long. But if that was the case, Tete Nebi-Fu may have lived through the final moments of the Old Kingdom, watching the Golden Age crumble from inside the palace walls. And then he was buried. The body was looted, or perhaps just lost to time. But the team says they're still studying the tomb, still uncovering the traces of this incredible man. Overall, ancient Egyptians were practicing medicine on a crazy advanced level. Some practices feel familiar even today. They had hospitals, specialists, surgeries, and many more things, even medical schools. Both men and women were allowed to be doctors. They healed with various methods and practiced surgery with actual tools, scalpels, forceps, even sutures. Some doctors treated only the eyes, others the teeth, the stomach, or even what they called the hidden diseases. They knew how to clean and dress wounds, could set broken bones using splints made of wood or reeds wrapped in linen, and even prevented infections. There were even proctologists. They also built the first prosthetics, like a wooden toe with leather straps that help people walk normally again. The oldest known prosthetic is 3,000 years old. Now, the most shocking part is how they actually even tried to remove tumors. A recent study looked at a 4,000 years old skull. It belonged to a man in his 30s. There were signs of past tumors, and around 3 of them, there were marks, surgical cuts made with a metal tool. That suggests someone attempted to remove or study them, maybe treatment, maybe an autopsy. There was another skull of a woman over 50 years old. It also showed similar signs, but with healed fractures from an earlier injury, which is amazing because her treatment might have actually been successful. Being a healer in this society meant something powerful. It meant being a priest, a scientist, and a magician all at once. To ancient Egyptians, medicine was a necessary art, and they treated it with as much reverence as they did their deities. That's because they believed that sickness could be both physical and spiritual. So a doctor could recite a spell while applying a salve, and a lot of their treatments worked. The reputation of doctors in ancient Egypt was so strong that leaders from other parts of the ancient world, like Persia, actually sought them out. Even Homer, the Greek poet, once said the Egyptians were the most skilled healers of all. Of course, their understanding of the human body wasn't perfect. For example, they thought the heart controlled thought and emotion. They also didn't know what the brain really did. But their approach, observe symptoms, diagnose, and treat, well, that's modern medicine. Sure, they prayed over the wound, but they also healed it, didn't they? Their most famous physician was Imhotep. That guy was a true polymath, an architect, priest, and a healer who became so revered he was later worshipped as a deity of medicine. Yep, a human who was so cool they turned him into a deity. He lived 2,000 years before Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine. And yet, some people joke we should drop the Hippocratic Oath altogether and swear an Imhotepic Oath instead. These people weren't just laying the foundations of pyramids. They were laying the foundations of healthcare.
It's dark, and it's hot, and it's difficult to breathe deep underground in Karowe Mine in the heart of Botswana. It's been countless hours since your shift started, and yet another rock in your hands doesn't look promising. On the other hand, there is a tiny chance that it's the largest diamond you've ever found. You decide to inform your Canadian bosses from Lucara Diamond Corp. And bingo! The stone you found turns out to be a breathtaking 2,492 carat diamond, the second largest ever found. Now, the average engagement ring size is 1.7 carats. It means that just this diamond could be enough to supply rings for more than 1,465 brides. You can compare the size of the previous stone with the size of a fist. And the weight of this priceless giant is over a pound. Its value hasn't been determined yet, But how about we speculate a bit? So, another diamond from the same mine, called the Constellation, was sold for $63 million in 2016. And that was only 813 carats, less than a third of this new one's size. The only other discovered diamond that's larger is the famous Cullinan diamond. It was discovered in South Africa back in 1905 and weighed 3,106 carats. Now, calculate how many engagement rings we could make out of it and write the number down in the comments. Sadly, it was later cut into several smaller diamonds, and some of those pieces are now part of the British crown jewels. Interestingly, once there was an even larger diamond-like stone, a black diamond called carbonado. It was found above ground in Brazil in the late 1800s. The coolest thing about it is that it may have come from a meteorite. The Sergio Carbonado, which is the stone's name, was broken into smaller pieces. They wanted to use it in industrial drill bits because it's one of the toughest materials on Earth. This new diamond was actually found with the help of advanced technology. The company used an X-ray system called Mega Diamond Recovery X-ray Transmission to detect the stone. This isn't the first record-breaking diamond Lucara has found at the Karowe mine. Back in 2019, they discovered the Sewelo diamond, which was 1,758 carats. At that time, it was the second largest diamond in the world. Luxury brand Louis Vuitton later purchased the gem for an undisclosed sum. And before that, in 2015, they found the Lascetti La Rona diamond at the same mine. It weighed 1,109 carats and brought the company $53 million in 2017. Diamonds aren't the only amazing thing you can find in the ground. The better and deeper you dig, the rarer objects you're likely to discover, like an ancient lipstick, for example. It might be the oldest lipstick in the world since it's about 5,000 years old. This deep red lip paint was found in a stone vial in southern Iran. The vial actually popped up in 2001, but it took researchers until recently to figure out what it really was. Because it's not like modern lipstick in a tube. People likely applied it with a brush. Researchers are happy, since this find could give us a glimpse into what women from the Bronze Age might have done to stand out. Those from elite societies probably applied this lipstick to look glamorous and show off their high status. Now, here's the backstory of the vial. It came from a 3rd millennium BCE graveyard and was linked to the powerful Marhazi civilization. It was a big deal in that part of Mesopotamia at the time. The graveyard was uncovered after flooding, and unfortunately, looters got their hands on many items. But luckily, the authorities managed to recover this particular piece. The vial caught scientists' attention because it was different from other items they'd found. Normally, they'd come across gray, compact substances in similar containers. But when they opened this particular one, a loose, fine powder spilled out. It was dark grayish purple in color, nothing like what they'd seen before. When the researchers analyzed the powder, they found out that it was made with hematite, which gave it a rich, deep red color. It also had other ingredients like vegetable oils and waxes, making it really similar to what you'd expect in a modern lipstick. Apparently, back in the Bronze Age, makeup was a sign of luxury and superior status in that area. It showed off wealth and power, especially in elite circles. By the way, the researchers don't want to claim for sure that this is the world's oldest lipstick, because who knows? Something older might turn up someday. How about we move to Bulgaria right now and do some digging there? Wait, there's no need to take a spade and dirty your hands. An amazing discovery is already waiting for you. There they found a large marble statue. It's almost 7 feet tall, which might depict Hermes, a Greek deity. But the craziest thing is that it was buried in an ancient sewer for around 2,000 years. The statue is in really good shape, especially the head, which is super well preserved. There are some cracks in the hands, but overall, it's in surprisingly great condition, according to the scientific director of the excavation. And here's how they found the statue. The team was doing a routine dig in southwestern Bulgaria, near the Greek border. This area used to be part of the ancient city of Heraclea Sintica, which dates back to the 4th century BCE. While digging, the researchers stumbled upon the statue's marble foot. From there, they carefully uncovered the rest of it. It was a total surprise for them, since they didn't expect to find anything like this. Right now, the team is working on safely removing the statue from the sewer. It's really heavy, so they're using a crane to lift it out and transport it to the History Museum in Petrich. Once they restore and conserve it, the plan is to put it on display. Experts are very excited about this find. It could teach us more about the local culture in Heraclea Sintica, which isn't a very well-known ancient site. Now, if you're dreaming of making discoveries like this one but don't have a degree, don't lose heart. Even an amateur can make a scientific breakthrough. For example, you could find a Roman dodecahedron. It's this weird, mysterious 12-sided metal object about the size of a grapefruit, and no one really knows what they're used for. Historians have been scratching their heads about these things for centuries. This particular dodecahedron was discovered last summer in a farmer's field near Norton Disney, about 35 miles southeast of Sheffield. A group of volunteers had already found Roman coins and brooches in the area, so they knew the field might hold more treasures. A geophysical survey had shown areas underground where the Earth's magnetic field was disturbed, hinting that something might have been hidden there. The team started digging trenches during a 2-week excavation. On the second to last day, in Trench 4, someone spotted the dodecahedron. Richard Parker, the group's secretary, was nearby making tea when he heard the shout. He said they were all shocked because they hadn't found much metal, and then, boom, that awesome artifact simply popped up. The extra cool thing about that dodecahedron was that it was complete, which is rare. Many others found before were broken or incomplete. Plus, it's larger than usual. Roman dodecahedrons can be as small as a golf ball, but this one is closer to a grapefruit. Now, the dodecahedron is on display at a local museum. So far, over 100 Roman dodecahedrons have been found in northwestern Europe, mostly in former Roman territories like the Gallo-Roman regions. They date back to somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE. Each one is a hollow metal shell, usually made of bronze. It has 12 faces, with differently sized holes on each face. Around the holes, there are concentric rings imprinted into the metal, and at every corner where the faces meet, there's a small stud. There's no writing on them, and nothing in Roman texts mentions them at all. That's why nobody knows what these dodecahedrons were for. There are loads of theories. They could have been toys, dice, mace heads, or even tools for measuring distances in Roman artillery. Some people even think they were used for knitting gloves or even figuring out dates using the stars. But most of those ideas don't really hold up, so the mystery remains. You're heading to Spain with a team of archaeologists to try to find some ancient artifacts. You get lucky and uncover one of the greatest treasures of the Iberian Bronze Age. Iberian refers to the Bronze Age culture of Portugal and Spain. So you find and unearth coins, jewelry, vases, vessels, and 2 pretty strange items. One is something like a part of a scepter, and the other resembles a bracelet. And you know what's strange about them? They're connected with space. In 1963, several miles away from the city of Vienna, Spain, scientists discovered the treasure of Vienna, one of the most significant gold hoards from the Bronze Age. Interestingly, are there bronze treasures from the Golden Age? Never mind. All the gold found dates back to sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE, except for that scepter and bracelet. They were made by inhabitants of another planet, so their production date is unknown. Okay, that's a joke. However, a small part of this joke is true. When scientists studied the found gold, they discovered that those 2 items were made of iron. So what, you might think? Well, the catch is that in the Bronze Age, people didn't mine or manufacture iron. Work with this metal began around 850 BCE, about 400 to 700 years after the creation of the treasure of Vienna. How is this possible? A clue to this mystery can be found in ancient Egypt. In the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, an iron dagger was found, which was also made of similar iron. But this dagger was much more valuable than all the others. And that's because it was made from a space object, a meteorite. Yeah, that bracelet and scepter were also made of meteoritic iron. Its difference from Earth metal is that cosmic iron has a high nickel content, so it all makes sense. People from the Bronze Age couldn't mine iron from the deep bowels of our planet, but nothing prevented them from collecting iron falling from the sky. Just imagine how cool it is to have jewelry or a dagger made of material that has traveled millions of years through the vast expanses of space. Perhaps it even contains particles of an ancient extinct star. Today, these two artifacts from the treasure of Vienna are the oldest recorded items in the Iberian Peninsula made of meteoritic iron. Now, with everything in its place, you can turn your attention to all the wealth of the treasure of Vienna. It contains 66 items: bowls, bracelets, bottles, gold jewelry, 3 silver bottles, and an amber gold button. 22 pounds of ancient gold. People hid it, and only after 3,000 years we were able to discover it. This archaeologist's dream can be found in the Vienna Museum, where exhibits from different time periods are presented, from prehistoric times like 50,000 years ago to the present day. Items from the Iberian period, from the Roman period, from the Arab civilization. You can find not only jewelry and coins, but there are also remnants of columns, ceramics, and other architectural artifacts. The collection is considered one of the most important prehistoric treasures of Europe. And the coolest thing is that you can see it all with your own eyes for just €2, which is about $2. Go to Vienna, find the museum, and enjoy. Hey buddy, I heard you have a metal detector. Could you help me find a hammer I left somewhere in the field? Your old farmer friend asks. You take a metal detector and go searching, but instead of a hammer, you find hundreds, even thousands of silver coins worth $2 million. You're so happy that the farmer lost that hammer, and now you're rich. Stop! Considering that this land belongs to the farmer, would you tell him about the find or take it with you? In reality, neither of these options happened. In 1992, Eric Laws was helping a farmer search for a lost hammer in a field near Hoxney, Suffolk, England. The metal detector stumbled upon a hidden treasure, a huge one. There were silver spoons, gold jewelry, more than 500 gold coins, and about 14,000 silver ones. Eric Laws accidentally discovered the largest collection of gold and silver from the late Roman period in Britain. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he and the farmer didn't receive the treasure. It's now in the British Museum. Let's move away from the farmer's field to somewhere on the Mediterranean coast. Imagine you're a scuba diver. There was a strong storm yesterday, but now with the water calm, you dive in and discover the seabed covered with gold dinars. This story happened in 2015. The coins which the storm brought to the shore might have been minted even before the First Crusade that started in 1096. This collection is one of the most impressive archaeological finds in the world. All these treasures surely can make the heads of those who find them spin, but they end up in a museum. And that's a good thing, because such wealth can drive a person crazy. A metal detector and a diving suit helped people discover ancient treasures. What's next? How about a dog? Yes, it could be perhaps a great replacement for a metal detector, by the way. So in 2013, 2 people were walking their dog in Northern California on their property. Suddenly, they discovered a rusty can filled with coins minted from 1847 to 1894. There were about 1,500 coins, and they all were gold. Another chance for a carefree, rich future? Not this time. The find caused a lot of controversy among specialists. There was one version, according to which these coins could have been stolen from the US Mint. But later, the US Mint debunked this suggestion, as they'd never had this gold in their storage. Anyway, it's interesting what the point was in hiding it all in someone else's yard. Some thief risked their freedom and life to get rich. When they succeeded, they just hid the coins as if they never existed. What a strange deal. Coins, jewelry, meteorite items, it's all cool. But let's end our video with something grand and epic. Archaeologists were conducting research near the Mediterranean coast of Egypt and discovered a treasure trove inside a sunken temple and sanctuary. Despite the waves, earthquakes, and seawater, the massive find was preserved in a not bad condition. The temple was built a very long time ago and collapsed in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. It was an important structure in ancient Egypt. People considered this place holy. Pharaohs came to the temple to seek help from the higher powers of Egyptian mythology to obtain titles for their rule. Titles of kings of the universe. For many people, this place was like the center of the universe, and now it lies forgotten on the seabed, almost ruined. Time spares nothing. Researchers found out the temple had been part of an ancient port city. A long time ago, an earthquake occurred in this area and destroyed the city. Tidal waves softened the ground and dragged the town into the Mediterranean Sea. While studying the temple, scientists found many secret treasures there: silver ceremonial instruments, gold jewelry, and alabaster vessels. In past times, people used them to store perfumes or greasy ointments called unguents. Perhaps in ancient Egypt, they weren't bad in the field of cosmetology. Near the temple, archaeologists discovered a Greek sanctuary. Apparently, the Greeks living in Egypt or coming here on business wanted to pay tribute to Aphrodite, so they created a small building in her honor. In that place, archaeologists found bronze and ceramic artifacts from different cultures. Scientists found out that the Greeks had permission to trade in the Egyptian city and even be its residents. It seems pharaohs living around 600 BCE were favorable to the Greeks. The profession of an archaeologist is very exciting. But what would you do if you found some ancient treasure? Before answering this question,